Hello and welcome. My name's Topher, and you are joining me for another slow chat. This Thursday night ritual that we seem to have started. I have another fantastic and super exciting guest, and super timely and topical. There's a lot actually that we're going to be able to talk about that just by a quirk of timing. I've got him on exactly the right week, and that is, of course, David Limbrick MP. It's a name that if you've been following my work, you will know his name simply because he's done some fantastic work that I've just been posting onto my Facebook page and trying to get the word out that, hey, there are actually some people out there, some MPs out there that are on the right side of so many of these issues. I mean, obviously, there's a lot that are on the wrong side, but you know what? We're not actually completely alone. In the last couple of weeks, I've interviewed some people from federal parliament that have been on our side, and this week is my first from the Victorian Parliament. So I'm super excited. But before we get stuck into that, I want to give a little bit of time for a few more people to settle down with their mug of tea, which I have mine here. If you follow the slow chats, you kind of know how this evolved, right? I'm someone who loves to relax with a cigar. This is one of the things. It's bad for my physical health. I'm not going to pretend like it's good for my physical health, but I tell you what, I am going to tell you that it's good for my mental health. And these things help me to think. They help me to relax. They help me to de-stress. I see there, Dr. Dribbs has said, oh yeah, bring on the Victorian People's Opposition Leader. I agree. I think David's been doing a better job than the opposition have at being the opposition. Anyway, so I'm going to enjoy this. And some people get their knickers in a knot. They're kind of like, oh, how can you wait till after the show to have your cigar? What, have you got no self-control? No. This is the point. And this whole format has come out of me sitting down, having a cigar. And instead of doing it on my own with my thoughts, I used to just live stream. And anyone that wanted to join me could join me. And those that didn't, of course, could move on and do whatever they wanted to do with their evening. And that's how this has evolved. And now I'm interviewing people because I think hearing somebody else talking is far more interesting than listening to me talk. So that's how this evolved. I'm going to enjoy myself one of these. This is an amazing cigar, a beautiful big Punch Deluxe, a gift from and the person who gave this to me. You know who you are, and no doubt you're watching. So thank you so much. I am very, very grateful. And I've never had one of these before, and I'm very much looking forward to that. I am pairing it with some Highland Park 12. I like my whiskey as far north as possible. The further north you go, the better. And this is from the Orkney Islands. What a beautiful bottle too. Check that out. Absolutely magnificent. Okay. But you didn't come here to hear me talk about whiskey. You didn't come here to hear me talk about cigars. You came here to hear me talk to the one and the only David Limbrick MP, honorary leader of the opposition in Victoria right now. David, how are you?
Great. How are you, Topher? Great to see you again.
I'm doing very, very well. Good to see you. We've seen each other under some strange circumstances lately. We've crossed paths at a couple of protests that have happened. I was one of the co-hosts when Discernible chatted with you when you did that amazing protest. And I want to commend, let's start here. Why not? You sat out the front of Parliament House on some picnic chairs. I think Tim Quilty, your colleague from the Liberal Democrats, joined you. And to her credit, I believe Catherine Cumming also joined you. Catherine Cumming MP also joined you. Yes, for a little while as well. So credit where credit is due. But that I think put you on the map for a lot of people. There's a lot of people that for very rational reasons don't pay any attention to politics. And now they're starting to pay attention because they're starting to look around and go, hang on, something's really wrong here. I don't understand what's going on. And they're coming across people like you. What was it about that particular, the playgrounds in particular, that made you just turn around and go, nah, stuff this. I'm gonna go and sit out the front and just take a stand on this?
Oh, look, I mean, you would know that I've been very upset about the restrictions and the way they've gone about them for this entire pandemic, pretty much. Yes. But shutting down the playgrounds, I felt it was forcing parents to be in this position where they have to choose between the law or the welfare of their kids, right?
Yeah.
And I just felt like the justification and that they sort of weren't really coming up with. They said, oh, well, maybe there's a transmission. I just felt like they're so out of touch. I have to do something. And so I wasn't actually sure whether I'd get arrested or not. Because I know, protests are illegal at the moment. It's, lots of people want to protest, I know. But one of the things that members of Parliament have is what they call parliamentary privilege. Now, when people normally talk about that, it's normally what they mean is you're saying things when you say things in
On the
Parliament, you
floor
can't
of
get
Parliament.
sued. Yeah, you can't, or in committee meetings and stuff, you can't get
Okay.
sued for defamation. And there's a very good reason for that in that it allows members of Parliament to call out corruption and stuff like that, and name things and things like that. It can also be abused, of course. But another thing that a lot of people don't realise with parliamentary privilege is that the executive doesn't have the right to stop members of Parliament conducting their business, right?
Yeah, okay.
Now, the thinking behind that is that the police could threaten members of Parliament theoretically to not leave their home or attend a vote or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's a fundamental democratic thing, and this goes back like well before Australian history, back to Cromwell. I think like this is one of the rights of members of Parliament is that they have the ability to go about their business, and that's what I've said when I've gone to protest. I said, I'm a member of Parliament. I'm doing my job here. I'm observing I'm listening to what the people have to say, and I'm observing the police response, just like the media is meant to be, just like the police, just like all the other essential services. Anyway, in this particular case, we just decided to sit out the front. Now, I wasn't quite sure if they were going to actually arrest us or not. They were getting pretty concerned. Originally, I planned to sit there for a long time, like days.
That's a fair effort. That's ambitious.
Yeah, I was ready to sit there for days. But what started happening is lots of people started just showing up. I told people on social media, please don't come. I didn't want to, I didn't want to get arrested for incitement, but more importantly, I didn't want members of the public to get fined or in trouble or anything like that. So I said, please don't come. But they came anyway, and curfew was approaching, and we pulled the plug before curfew because I was worried that people were going to start getting arrested and stuff, and I didn't want to see people get hurt. So I thought we'd made our point. But yeah, I mean, like, obviously even they realised they'd gone too far because they came out with this crappy announcement yesterday that the playgrounds are reopening, which is a total lie. It's a total lie.
The cynicism here, we've got to call out the cynicism here, because he introduced the playground lockdowns, as you said before, on this idea that maybe there might have been one transmission that occurred at a playground, which we haven't seen any evidence that was even true at any point or thought to be true at any point. It's just a claim that they've made. To my knowledge, to this day, we have no examples of outdoor transmission in Australia, as far as I'm aware, and extremely few transmissions amongst children, and very few transmissions amongst contact, where one person has had contact with a surface and then someone else contacts that surface and contracts it. It's almost always due to face-to-face or passing each other. So this would be like the trifecta holy grail in order for a transmission to actually occur at a playground. And yet, on the possibility that there might have been one, he shut them down. In the following 2 weeks, he lost 12 percentage points of popularity for his lockdowns. He went from 56% to 44%, is my understanding. And then all of a sudden, now that his lockdowns are less than 50% popular, he's reopening the playgrounds with all these absurd conditions. This just, it feels incredibly cynical to me. The whole way through, he's defended himself by saying it's based on the science. Have you seen any science? Have they actually been disclosing any science to the other MPs?
No, almost nothing. So we have to go back a bit, right? So in the laws that they're using, the legislation is called the Public Health and Wellbeing Act, right?
Yeah.
Now, it's had this ability to declare a state of emergency, which lasts for 6 months and gives the government extraordinary powers through the chief health officer. Okay. Yeah. We can do all these things. Now, by the end of that first 6 months, we weren't convinced. I think at the start, we were like everyone else. We're like, okay, we don't like emergency powers. I'm sure people like yourself and many in the audience will be familiar with the terrible, terrible history of emergency powers and how they've been used.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, but we heard the original plan was this 2 weeks to flatten the curve, right? It sounds sensible. We need to buy a bit of breathing space to prepare our health system for what's coming, so it doesn't get overloaded. And that's what they went with. And it sounded sort of reasonable.
I will credit that with at least having a logic behind it. Right.
Yeah,
I still don't think it was appropriate, but there was a clear logic behind it. It was actually a strategy. I don't think it was the right strategy, but it was actually a strategy. And then it all went weird after that.
Yeah. So we said at the time, look, we don't like emergency powers. The government, what people forget is that the government had used emergency powers already only a couple of months before for the bushfires. And we also expressed concerns about emergency powers then. But we acknowledged that it was a serious emergency, the bushfires. And I felt that the government actually used those emergency powers responsibly during that period. So I'll give them credit where it's due.
Sure.
And so we were willing to, just watch what was happening. And what we thought would happen, rather naively in hindsight, was that they would come up with some specific legislational rules and then introduce that into Parliament, and then we'd vote on it, and then the emergency powers would be rescinded. And that's not what happened at all. We got right to the end of the 6 months, and then there's this huge fight on to extend the emergency powers. And we're saying, well, we haven't seen the underlying science that they're using for these directions, and we haven't seen the Human Rights Charter assessments, which is the other thing that I've been chasing up. So when they make these directions under the Public Health and Wellbeing Act, they have to be what's called, proportionate. So the response has to be proportionate to the risk posed to the population, but they also have to be the least restrictive of rights. And I'm not convinced that that's actually been happening. And and they haven't been showing us these Human Rights Charter assessments. So in Victoria, we have the Charter of Human Rights, and they have to assess what they're doing against that charter, and they haven't released it. And we tried to get it through Parliament, and then they claimed executive privilege. They said, it's not in the public interest to release it. And so,
and that seems an extraordinary admission in and of itself. If it hangs together well, and the human rights assessment makes sense and is internally consistent and reasonable, passes the pub test, then there would be no objection. There'd be no reason not to put it out publicly. So in a sense, the only way to interpret that claim is that they've had to manipulate it. They've had to twist it somehow to try and make it work. I mean, is there a charitable interpretation to what they've said?
Look, I don't know. Look, I can only speculate. Like, maybe they're worried of getting sued. I mean, and if they open it up, then, people might start to question it. People might say, well, actually, what you've done here isn't proportionate. And maybe
isn't that the point of how a democracy is supposed to work? That we do get to question it?
Yeah. Well, that's how it's meant to work. And so I saw a comment in there from my colleague Tim Quilty about how he regrets not opposing using the emergency powers straight up. But we did discuss this at length at the time, and we were always concerned about emergency powers. And as it's turned out, it's been a total disaster. Now, anyone who understands anything about economics, and I know that you do, they know that there's costs, right? Yeah. And the costs here are not, of course, there's financial costs, like massive financial costs. That actually wasn't my main concern initially. My main concern back then was what's the harms about taking children out of school? And I asked this, so I worked really hard to try and get appointed to the Parliamentary Accounts and Estimates Committee, because they were having an inquiry into the government's response to the pandemic. And I was saying to the Education Minister, Minister Molino, about shutting down the schools. Like, what are we doing here? And then he came back at me and he said, well, what do you want us to do? Do you want us to just run an experiment? And I said, well, you're running an experiment right now. We've never taken kids out of school like this for such a long period of time.
100%.
And that turned out to be sort of prophetic. I was seeing I've got 3 boys of my own. I was seeing the damage to them. But then all these people like started calling our office and sending me emails and, through social media and stuff. And the stories were horrific. And they got more and more and more and more horrific. And I think, we're at the point now where the government, it's impossible for the government to hide it anymore. Like it's just blatantly obvious to anyone who's got children or has been anywhere near children, that in the last few months that there's serious harms being done to kids by locking them up like this. And that's my biggest concern is, are we creating a generational catastrophe here? Like,
at multiple levels, there's the issue of the actual education and the academic attainment. I was homeschooled myself, and I'm homeschooling my 5-year-old, and I hope to homeschool my kids all the way through, situation allowing. And I was tickled pink because the question you get when you're a homeschooler is, oh, what about your social development? What about your social interaction? And I was tickled pink to see, obviously, a tongue-in-cheek little cartoon, a little meme that said that out of concern for raising well-adjusted, well-socialized children, more parents are turning to homeschooling. And it had pictures of these kids, being forced to social distance and in their little partitions and all that sort of stuff inside a school. And there is this, I think it's a very serious concern about the impact on how these children are going to view other people and how well they're going to develop that social interaction. Up until now, I mean, this pisses me off. On the Australian Medical Association and other respected medical websites in Australia, up until very recently, they've had lots of information encouraging parents to have face-to-face time with their kids, the importance of face-to-face time, the importance of eye contact, the importance of that level of interaction, particularly early in a child's development. Now, all of a sudden, we're sticking masks on everybody, and they're actually deleting that information from the AMA website. It's gone. From other websites, it's gone. They're actually erasing a well-established, well-tested, well-understood medical principle about childhood development because it disagrees with the current politics of the day. We're seeing, I think, a politicization of everything. Nothing is anymore allowed to be outside of politics. You're a libertarian. I'm a libertarian. We should talk a little bit about what that is, because I have a fairly diverse audience and not every, and a lot of new people, so they may not really even understand what that means. But what are the implications of this kind of politicization of everything and this weaponizing of every issue into a political weapon?
I think that the pandemic has totally disrupted politics. Disrupted in a way that people couldn't easily have predicted. You note that, one of the big concerns that I've had is about the impact on human rights, right? Mm-hmm. So the rights of children and the rights of peaceful assembly and all this. And historically, it's been people from the left that have been fighting this. Now, I've never referred to myself as right-wing. Some people call me right-wing, but sure. Historically, it's been the left. You look at the 60s, the people fighting for free speech in the US and Australia, they were fighting for all these rights. It was all from the left.
Fighting against conscription during the Vietnam War, etc. It was all it was seen as a hippie left-wing kind of thing. Yep. Yeah.
And all these sort of, freedom ideas. And now we're in this sort of situation where, and I think this has probably had a lot to do with why our party's had a lot more interest in that. We've been around for 20 years, right? And the only thing that our whole rationale, our whole reason for existence is to defend the rights and liberties of Australians. That's why we exist, right? Yep. And people are looking around now that everyone's had their liberty taken away to some degree. They're looking around, they're saying, who's defending it? Who's defending it? There's not many people out there actually defending it. And what you've discovered is a lot of the people that you thought were defending human rights were actually only doing it for preferred groups.
Partisan.
They weren't really defending the rights of people at all. And I've been very, very disappointed with many different organizations and government as well, of course. But we're still doing it, and I feel that it's more important than ever now that people know the pain and the suffering that's taken away from people when their liberty is taken away. You know, when I first got elected, one of the first things I started doing is talking to groups I'm in Southeast Metro, and there's lots of
you're actually my member of the Legislative Council for where I live.
That's good. Yeah, you're a constituent, so
I voted for you. Trust me.
Thank you. I was talking to refugees. There's lots of people in Southeast Metro that are refugees, and they understand liberty better than anyone because they've escaped it. They've escaped.
Even at the protests, I'm going to these protests and I'm looking around. I'm seeing every skin color, every age group, male, female, and lots of people that are on their way between the two or off to something else entirely, and lots of immigrants. And they're seeing. The way I put it is this: in the West, we are the spoiled trust fund babies of the world, right? We think our future is set because our daddy's rich. And we are living off what our fathers and our ancestors, not just our males, obviously, but what our ancestors did and what they built. And we think we've got it made because of them. And then there's all the other people that live out there in the real world where hard work is required, where they've seen what can go wrong, that we've been protected from all this time. And they're looking at us going, you are so clueless. And you have everything and you're just giving it away.
Australia's quite different to a lot of the Western world, though. Like America had to fight for their liberty. They didn't. They didn't get it given to them. The United Kingdom as well. They had the civil wars. They had all sorts of wars and things, and they fought for their liberty. Australia just sort of had it, and we joined in wars and things like that. But we didn't really have to fight for it so much.
Not on our soil.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe that's made it a bit different here. I don't know. Maybe that's why the reaction has been a bit different here to other countries. I'm not sure. But
if I put my hat on, I'm 39 years old. I was born in Australia. I've traveled a little bit, but never really lived outside of Australia. So I'm about as spoiled Aussie as you can get. What's the hardest thing I've ever seen in my life? Oh, sorry, not seen, actually experienced. I've been out of work and had to find a job, but in the context of an economy that's not too bad, right? There are jobs out there. You just have to go and do the legwork and go and be willing to do whatever jobs you can find. But there are jobs there. I've tried to start businesses and with very mixed success. I've had a few successes and certainly a few not successes. But again, in the context of an economy that's pretty good. I mean, the global financial crisis, didn't really hurt us too much. The Asian financial bubble, the dot-com bubble and the Asian financial crisis, we kind of skated through all of that. I can kind of remember the recession we had to have, but that's a memory from when I was a kid. I didn't really live that. So my life has basically been a continuous run of economic growth, increasing house prices, jobs available, all of the rest of it. In that context, I can kind of sympathize for how people do become really complacent. And, I had a lefty friend of mine at the election in 2007 where Kevin Rudd won over the top of, his name's just gone from my head, John Howard. I had this lefty friend of mine. So my background is in the arts. So I've got a lot of lefty friends, even though I'm a libertarian and I was a conservative, and I kind of moved from being a conservative to being a libertarian today. I think you did the opposite journey. You went from being...
I did the opposite. Yeah.
Maybe we'll talk about that later. But he did this post on Facebook. He said, there's more to Australia than just the economy. And he's right. There is. That's true. But my reply to him at that time, because the point he was trying to make was John Howard was banging on about his economic record and everything else. And I said, yeah, that's true. But it's also easy to say when you've only ever known a good economy. Say that to people when they're facing 14, 15% interest rates and high inflation and high levels of unemployment. Like all of a sudden, the importance of the economy is going to shift a little bit. And I'm sick and tired of people talking about the restrictions around COVID and saying, yeah, but it's just money. I must do that a lot.
I think that's sort of, I came up against that argument when I first started talking about the restrictions. But what the economy really is the needs and desires of humans cooperating with each other. That's what the economy is, right? It's the cooperation of humanity. And when you shut down the economy, you're shutting down cooperation between humans. You're shutting down their needs and desires to live their lives the way that they choose to live. And people see it as just money, but money is the way of placing value on these things. But really, you want to smoke a cigar, right? Like a lot of people might think that that's a trivial thing, but maybe it's important to you. You make a choice, and you're an adult, and you can make choices, right?
Yep.
But other people, they want to buy food for their children, and other people want to buy all sorts of things. And it's about cooperation and providing, human needs and desires.
100%. I describe money as a language. It's actually a way of talking to each other. And when we give our money to somebody in return for their product, their service, whatever, what we're actually saying to them is, thank you, please keep going. Please keep doing what you're doing, right? Because I value that more than the money that you need from me in order to get that product or service. There's actually this amazing conversation that's going on all the time. And when a business, and I've been there before, not with a sizable business, but with my own small little enterprises and side hustles, when you're not making money, people are still talking to you. When they look at your product and they look at your price and they go, actually, I'm going to keep my money, thank you very much. They're still talking to you. They're giving you feedback. They're giving you information. And it's a language, and we're talking to each other all the time. And when we shut down the economy, we completely stop that conversation from happening. And it's not something that just restarts instantly. These are long supply chains, sometimes with long timelines. There are, I've got a local coffee shop here that I love to support, a beautiful immigrant couple with 2 boys. They came from Sri Lanka. They make the best coffee in the area, in my opinion. And so instead of buying 1 coffee, I'm now buying 2 coffees and some food from them, and just trying to pump a bit more money into their shop, because when this is all over, I need them to still be open, because otherwise, where am I going to find coffee that's as good as what they make? It's a literal conversation that we're having when we actually hand that money over. People seem to think you can switch it off and switch it on.
Yeah, and the economy is not just money either. It's also the sharing of ideas and speak like what we're doing now. We're sharing language and ideas with each other. We're interacting with other cultures. We're preventing war, which originally was my primary motivation for getting in. My very first protest I went to when I was in high school, actually. But I've always been anti-war, and I'm still anti-war. Trade prevents war. When humans cooperate with each other, even if they don't particularly like each other, you and I might not like each other, but if we have a cooperative relationship with each other, we're not going to harm each other, right? And it's the same with countries. If countries trade with each other, and you know about the thing, when goods cross borders, armies don't, and that's
exactly.
Of course, I think it's Bastiat. I think So I think trade is really important for peace. Now
I want to come.
What we've started though here is we've started an internal war within our own country, because we've isolated everyone from each other, and we've turned everyone against each other. And and I think there's a new political order emerging here, that you've got the people have always you used the term left before, this left and right thing, and I've always thought that's a bit silly.
It is too simplistic.
But you've got this real gap between the authoritarian view and the libertarian view, I think, and you've seen this trouble brewing. Libertarians have seen this a long time ago, but it's becoming so dangerous now that it's obvious to everyone. I'll give you a good example, the magical thinking of governments, how they can control everything and manipulate everything into this perfect world scenario. If only they just pulled this lever and twisted this button the right way. A really good example is the Towards Zero campaign for road accidents, right? So they've got this unattainable goal of no one ever dying on the roads. Now, of course, we could achieve that tomorrow. We set speed limits to 4 kilometers an hour, and no one will ever have another car accident, right? We can achieve it. We can do it straight away because, we could do it. But they're ignoring the costs. And the costs are the convenience to people's lives, all of these other things. And so humans have to, accept risk in their life, right? And that same mentality has been brought to the pandemic.
Can I echo that? And because people immediately retort and say, yeah, but road accidents aren't contagious. Okay. And that's and they seem to think that that's a complete argument. At that point, they can dismiss the whole road accident risk analysis argument. Well, we've lost in Australia. If you go on to I did find it when I did a post about this, I don't know, a month or so ago. You can find the yearly data on the number of people who died on our roads. You know what it adds up to in the history of Australia? 200,000 people.
It's a lot of people.
200,000 people have died on our roads, and we judged as a nation that it was worth it. Now, that's not to say we did nothing, and this is why I think it's a really good example. Early on in the pandemic, when we really didn't know yet, we didn't have the data yet to understand what we were dealing with, just how bad was it really, etc. I have some sympathy, not a lot, I got to be honest, but I have some sympathy for governments looking at it going, well, this could be really bad and maybe we need to err on the side of caution while we don't have a lot of data, etc. But the roadmap can be found in the way that we've handled road fatalities. We've improved the engineering of the roads. We've improved the technology in the cars themselves. We have driver training. We have various things like that. Now, I would quibble about whether certain things should be mandatory or not, blah, blah, blah. But nevertheless, the framework that has been culturally accepted is this framework in which we take steps that are not too costly and not too disruptive to remove the worst of the risk, right? And then we accept the fact that there is still some latent risk. What does it say about us? Why didn't we, or why couldn't we take that approach with COVID? Why did the fearmongers win and aim for this impossible target?
Because it succeeded originally. I think they'd always had this inner belief that they could, through their magical powers, they could control everything to however they want. And then they got us down to 0 cases. I don't believe there ever really was 0 cases because it was sort of always going to be bubbling away out beyond their reach. So, the whole donut day thing is, silly really. But, they had this goal of COVID 0, right? And the idea of, doing something like what, Sweden did, where they tried to have a more, they made mistakes like every country did, but they had
got in their nursing homes.
So they made mistakes like everyone, but they're basically back to normal now. They're basically back to normal. Other countries dealt with it a bit differently, but everyone was rubbishing Sweden at first at the time. And anyone who said that we should do something similar to what Sweden's doing became an outcast. And I was just questioning.
I experienced that.
Yeah, I was just questioning. Originally, though, I wasn't pretending like I had a solution. I was just questioning the legality of it. If they're not showing us how this is a proportionate response to what they're doing, is it even legal? And there hasn't been many instances where that's been looked at in much detail. The ombudsman did an investigation into the housing tower lockdown. And her conclusion was, anyone could read the report. It's on Parliament's website.
I posted it to my page.
Ombudsman's website. You can read it. And she quite clearly says that she believed that the actions were unlawful and breached human rights, according to the Charter.
I had that conversation with your colleague, Tim Quilty, who's also a member of Parliament for the Liberal Democrats. He kindly interviewed me on a little podcast that he did to discuss the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities, where it does clearly say that any restrictions on human rights, so here's the language, it affords us certain rights. And the language says there are times when human rights come into conflict with each other. And under those circumstances, it can be necessary to limit the rights in some way. However, the limitations must be necessary, proportionate, reasonable, and justified. Those are the 4 terms. And time bound. Okay, I didn't notice that bit. That must be in a slightly separate section.
Yeah, it has to be time bound. Well, it's time bound by the actual legislation itself. So
right.
It has to be time bound.
there's another thing that's easy to miss in there, and that is the legislation, the human rights, the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities only allows for limitations on human rights when rights are in conflict with other rights. So the government would first have to make the case that there is a human rights issue at stake here that is the basis for why they have to actually limit other rights in the first place, even to trigger that provision under the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities, and then would have to prove that it was necessary, reasonable, justified, and proportionate, a test that I think that they would fail miserably. But this brings me to one of my biggest concerns of what we're watching happen right now. I mean, we haven't even talked about the fact that Parliament's not meeting yet. We'll get to that. But it seems as though the judges in Victoria are largely just rubber stamping anything that the government wants to do. And if you look at some of the judgments that have come out, not that there's been a lot, but there's been a few, they seem to just be saying, yeah, okay, there's some issues here with human rights, there's some issues, etc., but it's an emergency. And so we're going to side with the government. That seems to be the approach. So at that point, why do we even have a Charter of Human Rights? Like, is our legal system functioning, do you think? That's a leading question, obviously, but we're supposed to have the legislature, we're supposed to have the judicial system, we're supposed to have the police exercising their own judgment in any given circumstance, and it feels like none of those things are happening right now.
Yeah, look, I mean, the Charter, in theory, the Charter's like, I've got some problems with the Charter, but in theory, it's quite a neat and good idea that, I think most libertarians or people who care about rights would support. Even your most hardcore libertarian would say that under certain circumstances, some rights will come into conflict with each other, and you'll need to figure out some way of balancing that, right? So, and I think and the rights in the disaster declaration that they made during the bushfire is a good example of this, right? So we believe in property rights, right? So someone owns something. But during a disaster declaration, the government can take property. Now, the thinking behind that is quite sensible to most people if it's used responsibly, which is always the problem, is that, during a bushfire, there might be a backyard pool or something. They want to take their water from the pool, right, to dump on a forest fire or something like that. Or they might need to take someone's equipment or whatever, and it says they need to be provided compensation and stuff like this for taking the property. But normally governments can't just come in and take property, except if we're talking about taxes, but that's a whole other thing. So there are situations where these things need to be balanced. But I think the Charter of Human Rights during the pandemic has been put to the test, and it's failed miserably. It's absolutely and totally failed, in my opinion. It needs to be strengthened. It's totally failed. I've been very, very critical, and in fact, I used hashtag defund last night for the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission. Yeah, right. I don't think that they've been doing a very good job at all. In fact, I think they've enabled human rights abuses in some ways. I would go that far. And I told them that when I met with them. And I tell you why I think that is when mask mandates were brought in, there was a lot of discussion at the time about, okay, well, what's the human rights impact here? And people were discussing it, right? They just came out and said, they made this statement, really blatant statement on their website saying mask mandates are not a human rights issue and basically the justification was because there's exemptions for people who can't wear masks. And I was like, oh, okay. And then everyone who questioned mandatory masks, which I was one of those people, I actually was asking why they weren't recommending wearing masks voluntarily before that, because other countries were doing it. Why weren't we? It seemed a bit silly. And then instead of doing it voluntarily, they went straight to mandatory. Now, at the time, I didn't really think about the impact on the people and who these people were who can't wear masks. And as it turned out, it's actually horrific. There's lots of people with, lung conditions, victims of trauma, including sexual assault, people with certain mental conditions. They just can't wear a mask because it triggers a panic reaction and things like this. Now, the government never tried to encourage any sort of compassion to these people.
Instead, and I think they've actively tried to do the opposite.
Yeah, they've tried to demonize people who don't wear masks as, anti-maskers and conspiracy theorists and stuff like this. Yeah. And these are some of the stories that people have been contacting me with, like, people, there's a woman with who's got a lung condition. She can't wear a mask because she can't breathe properly. And, people were yelling at her in the street and stuff. Yeah. And another woman who was a victim of violence, she's too scared to leave her home because if she goes to the supermarket, like, people look at her and stare at her, and like, it's just, and people are too scared to go to the doctor's clinics because many doctor's clinics won't let you in if you're not wearing a mask. Pharmacies were really hardcore about wearing masks. And so people were foregoing medical treatment and stuff and they've created this discrimination. So they've actively enabled this discrimination. Now, after the criticism, they actually brought out a retailer's guide and stuff and tried to educate retailers on, mask exemptions and stuff like that. But the retailers, I have some sympathy for the problem that they're in. They've got this situation where on the one side, they've got WorkSafe and all these new coronavirus restrictions breathing down their neck, and they're terrified of, if an outbreak happens in my business, they're going to come and shut me down and I'll get sued or something bad.
Let's do an exposure site and no one will come back.
Yeah. But on the other hand, they've got mask exemptions. Now, if they say, well, just, I'm not going to let you in if you're not wearing a mask, and they don't have to worry about the exemptions, then on the one hand, they're risking, trouble with WorkSafe, and on the other hand, they're risking, discrimination. And many of them are just making the choice that, WorkSafe is scarier. So
that's right. Yeah.
Because like if someone comes in to inspect in their shop and there's a bunch of people in there without masks, they'll say, well, you're not enforcing the chief health officer's guidelines correctly. We're going to shut you down or do whatever. And so, I mean, I've only called out one business specifically, and that was the casino. They had a blatant policy of zero exemptions, and I called them out because I figure they're sort of a government monopoly business anyway. And I haven't called out other businesses because I have been encouraging any business that I talk to educate themselves about this issue and show compassion to, if you see someone not wearing a mask, just treat them like a normal human being.
Leave them alone.
Just leave them alone.
Yeah. But this was the same thing. If you cast your mind back, do you remember there was a period of a couple of weeks where we were being actively told, don't wear masks. It's a waste of a mask. It was only a window of a couple of weeks, but that was the messaging coming out. And then all of a sudden it flipped in a very short space of time to mandatory masks. You're a bad person if you're not wearing a mask. During that period of time, if I saw somebody wearing a mask when the messaging was don't wear a mask, you know what I did? Treated them the exact same as anybody else. You know why? Because I don't know what's going on in their life. I don't know why they've chosen to wear a mask. Do they have an acute lung condition? Do they work with elderly people? Do they have people at home that are vulnerable? Who am I to judge their particular circumstance? But that logic isn't being applied the other way around now when people see someone without a mask. I want to give one, and your inbox must be full, probably fuller than mine, of people that they're looking for someone to tell. They need to tell someone what's happened to them and share that. And that helps to lift the burden for them a little bit. And some people turn to me, and I'm cool with that. If you want to do that, please do. But one of the stories that got shared with me a little while ago was someone who was in a doctor's clinic awaiting their own treatment for a fairly serious medical condition. And they saw two carers come in with an obviously autistic man who was clearly very apprehensive and not particularly dealing very well with the particular circumstances that he found himself in. He was in there for some sort of a checkup. And the lady at the front just turned around and without any compassion, without anything, just simply flat out told them they had to get him into a mask or they weren't coming in for his appointment, for whatever that appointment was. And there was a whole lot of backwards and forwards and a whole lot of basically trauma for the autistic man. And then ultimately they left, and he never got that appointment. He never got that treatment because he wasn't equipped to deal with being masked. For whatever reason, that was an issue for him. There was nothing the carers were going to be able to do or say that was going to change that. And anyone who understands autism understands that reality. And yet this woman at the front desk was just there's a rule and you are not coming in, and there's no room for compassion. There's no room for specific circumstances. There's nothing. And it just, what was the appointment for? I don't know. Neither does the person that told me the story. How serious is that man's health conditions? Are there going to be long-term health implications to missing that appointment? We'll never know the answers to any of those questions. But that scenario is being played out every single day, right across Victoria, for people who, in their own circumstances. And it's just, this, I think, is the problem with centralized decision making. The centralized decision makers, whether they're the conservative right wings or whether they're the progressive left wing, there's this tendency at both ends of politics, and this is why I think the spectrum, the left-right spectrum, is a bit wrong. It's I think, as you alluded to before, it's more of a sort of a diamond where you have this more freedom, less freedom kind of thing, top to bottom, and then you got your left and right along the way, but ultimately it's actually about the more and less freedom. But these people imagine, and Daniel Andrews imagines, that he can sit down with a handful of other people and write rules that can then be safely applied to every single person and all of their personal circumstances. We're seeing a centralization of power to a degree we've never seen before in Victoria. In a way, are we actually almost, is there a silver lining here where a lot of people are looking at it going, that's what centralized power looks like? No. I don't want that. Like, is that why the Liberal Democrats are getting a lot more members and a lot more attention now?
Oh, look, I think so. It's like what I said before. People are, as they've lost some of their, in many cases, the majority of their liberties and seen the horrible effect, they realise now how important it is to defend it and have a voice that's willing to defend it, and that's what we've committed to, and I know you've committed to as well. But we're in a situation now where people ridicule the idea of liberty. Like you see these they call it freedom. People want freedom. Because they're stupid, or it's like they've forgotten the values that of the Enlightenment, they've forgotten history and what's happened throughout history, and I think maybe we haven't forgotten that. And I try and look at things big picture, right? I'm not looking at this in terms of today. I'm looking at this in terms of the future, and I want history to remember that there were some people who were there right now that said no, that stood against what the government is doing right now. Like, history has to remember this. And, I think history will. And I tell you what, when you look at history, the people that defend liberty are very rarely the bad guys.
Correct. It's amazing.
That's the way I look at it. Look at it.
I don't know the name of the tank man, right, that stood in front of the row of tanks in Tiananmen Square, right? I don't know the name, and I think it is known, but there's a photograph during a speech in Nazi Germany, and there's a whole lot of people giving the Nazi salute. One person with his arms crossed. Correct, right? Now, I think we actually do know who he is. I think historians would be able to tell you what his name is. I don't know what his name is, but I know that he existed, that he lived, right? And that these people took the stand that they took. And I think that is such a psychologically powerful thing. I don't give a rat's whether history remembers my name. I couldn't care less. But if this is going to be the moment in time when Australia falls into a much more totalitarian form of government, which we're living in history right now, we don't know which way this ends. We don't know how it goes, right? But if that turns out to be that this is the moment of history that we are in, I'm determined that history will record that there were people who stood up. And I know that so are you, and I'm so grateful for that. Can I ask you, what was it that got you on this journey towards limited government, small government, from having been a progressive previously, where I'm putting words in your mouth, but you probably would have had issues where you would have happily seen the government have more power. That tends to be the profile of a progressive as well as the profile of a conservative, to now saying, actually, the government doesn't have that right. What got that thought process started for you?
So I think, like, the very first protest or the very first political action that I ever took was when I was a student, and it was the Gulf War. And all I knew was that there was going to be a war, lots of people were going to die, and it's in some faraway land, and maybe we shouldn't be involved. And that I didn't know anything about politics. I didn't know anything. And I just turned up in the city to this protest, and there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and they're all chanting, no blood for oil. And, like it was about oil, apparently. That's what everyone was saying, and, probably was. But basically, I didn't want a war. And I'm still, like I said, I'm still anti-war. I was also always questioned our drug laws. I always thought that, why is things like cannabis illegal for adults and things like this? Like, adults can make choices. Like, surely, cigars are much more harmful than cannabis, and they're legal. I
agree. I'm smoking a cigar right now, but I agree.
Yeah, and that's your right. Like, I mean, I don't question that. But it's, I suppose, so I'd always had this interest in liberty and freedom of speech, as well as always been a big thing. But I also had in the back of my mind that maybe I got sucked into the idea that a lot of people get sucked into, that if only the government could pull the levers and twist the dials this particular way, then, we get the settings right, and it would all be good, right? And I think that's what a lot of conservatives and progressives both think. And
this is worth keeping in mind. Those people, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Their intentions are good, but they are paving the road to hell. When you concentrate power into the hands of government, what's the quote? I'm going to abuse it, but a government that is powerful enough to give you everything you want is also powerful enough to take everything you have. That's been true throughout history, every single time it's been tried. These people mean well, but what they want is actually incredibly dangerous. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no. Well, you're exactly right. Like, a lot of people look at these, dictators and things throughout history, and they imagine that they're, evil people, right? And now, in some cases, they were evil, but
no doubt.
In their own minds, in many cases, they thought they were doing the right thing. They were saving people. They don't do it because they think they're the bad guys. They do it because they're doing it because they all of them think that they're doing the right thing one way or another.
Making the world a better place.
Yeah.
Rationale.
We have a goal. Like, that's what their thinking is. And if we can take control, we can do the right thing and make a utopia or whatever we're going to create.
And when we exterminate people, we're not exterminating people like you and me. We're exterminating the people that are holding us back. We have this vision of how the world can be, and if we can just get there, it'll be utopia, and we have to get rid of these people in order to get there. There's always that rationale that leads to incredibly evil actions out of this, road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah, and so what got me, what turned me away from that progressive side of things is actually what we talked about earlier. Is I actually read a book called Anarchy, State and Utopia, and by Robert Nozick. And I disagreed with some of the things in the book, but one of the things that he convinced me of was the idea of cooperation and economics, right? That you have this idea of just transactions. So, when you and I form a voluntary relationship, like right now we have a voluntary relationship. I have volunteered to be on your show. You volunteered to host me, and we have a voluntary relationship. This is a just transaction, right? Because we're both voluntary parties to this transaction, and we both benefit from it because for whatever reason, right? And it convinced me that, capitalism, what people call capitalism, which I would call, free markets, I suppose, is really just people cooperating with each other and prospering, right? And he convinced me of that, and then that led on this road to, technically, I suppose I'd call myself, I'd classify myself as a classical liberal, I suppose, but people don't know
what that means.
But ultimately, what it really means is that I just prioritize the individual's liberty over government control over people, and that's as simple. Some people talk about the non-aggression principle as well. The idea that you shouldn't initiate force against other people. It's unjustified.
Which is a problem for governments, because force is just about the only language that they actually have. They write a rule and then they punish people that don't abide by that rule. I want to bring up someone's comment here. So if you go far left or far right, you wind up at the same place, totalitarianism. That's correct. But actually, the reason I want to bring up this comment is Sky Ads were responsible for towing a banner up along the Queensland-New South Wales border that said, end lockdowns, vote Liberal Democrats, if I'm remembering rightly. And so I want to call this out and say, good on you, mate. That was a very, very good piece of publicity. I've seen the photos floating around. I haven't posted that photo to my page yet. I need to fix that. I need to get that photo.
The plane across the border. It was a very spicy plane. So yeah. Talking about history. I was very moved. In fact, when I got the message, I burst into tears when I found out about it. I've been very emotional recently. People have been worried about my mental health and stuff, but I've been telling people I think that being upset at the moment is a normal human reaction and not a mental health issue.
And probably an outlet that actually helps to release some of that.
But I got Tim and I. There was an artist in New South Wales. His name's Owen. Owen Slater. So I'll post it. Anyway, he did this piece of art with Tim and I.
Nice.
On it, and he sent it to us.
Nice.
And it's on the back. It's got, you probably can't read it, but it says for David and Tim, but more importantly for the children. And it's called The Mask of Sanity. And I said to him, he donated it to us, and I said, I'm hoping that one day in the future, we're going to have a section in the museum about the pandemic and what happened. And I said, I want to donate it to the museum and say,
yeah, that's cool.
But I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but
no. Well, this is the thing, when you're living in a moment, all you really know is that this is a really significant moment. And there's some stuff happening that we haven't sort of touched on yet. I want to bring up specifically Monica Schmidt and what just happened with her only a couple of days ago. The police pulled her over when she was driving and arrested her. And this is a tactic. If you go back on my Facebook page, you'll see me warning about this repeatedly over the last couple of months, how the police are now using bail conditions as a weapon. Now, bail conditions were intended to be a public safety tool. You would place conditions on somebody to ensure that they would show up to court, or to ensure that they wouldn't then reoffend or cause additional harm to the community in some way, shape, or form. It's now being used by Victoria Police. It is my personal opinion that it is at the behest of the Labor Party and Daniel Andrews to try and shut people down. And the most blatant example of that is what they tried to do to Monica Schmidt. So they said, hey, we'll release you on bail, but here are the bail conditions. And the bail conditions included deregistering or abandoning the Reignite Democracy Australia organisation that she created, which is right now applying for registration as a political party. So it is literally, the bail condition is, we're going to shut down your political party. Now, if that doesn't send a chill down your spine, I don't know what would. That she has to shut down all of her Facebook pages and not speak publicly about any of this stuff pretty much ever again, or certainly until the emergency is declared as being over, just completely shutting her down. To her credit, she has chosen not to accept those bail conditions. In my opinion, those bail conditions actually amounted to a judgment. They weren't bail conditions for public safety. It was the police operating on a pre-crime basis, where they were basically declaring her to be guilty before trial and applying a punishment to her before trial if she wanted. So forcing her to choose between accepting that punishment or accepting a jail term. That's literally the position that they put her in. That's how I would characterize it, in my opinion. She accepted the jail term because she was not going to accept those bail conditions. So right now, she is still in custody, will probably be in custody for weeks, if not months, until she eventually gets a hearing. It's probably in the interest of the Victorian government to delay that hearing for as long as possible. So this could drag on for quite some time.
Well, the courts are backlogged like you wouldn't believe at the moment. So, everything's running really slow. Look, I don't want to talk about specific cases because I don't want to...
Of course. Yep.
I don't want to... well, I don't want to jeopardize Monica's position for a start.
Yeah, understood.
But I will say this. She's not the first to
No,
to
she's
happen.
not.
There are many others that this has happened to. Many people who have, for whatever reason, now some people have been. I know that there's been religious people who have defied orders and had bail conditions placed on them like this, but also people who are independent. I would call them independent journalists. So people, who want to just record things and show what's really going on. There's been attempts by many people to intimidate them and do all sorts of things like this. And I think it's outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous.
It puts us, when you take that, you combine it with the fact that we are one of only a handful. People keep saying 3 countries. I don't know the exact number, but apparently only about 3 countries in the world that require an exit visa for their citizens to leave the country by default. And I believe those countries at the moment are North Korea, I think Syria, and Australia. That's the list that I've been told. I haven't verified that for myself, but there's certainly not a lot of countries in the world with that. We have internal borders that are shut to Australian citizens. We have Australian citizens locked out of the country overseas. We have political opposition being intimidated by police. I've had police at my front door multiple times trying to intimidate me out of doing what I do. And to add to all of that, David, right now, the Victorian Parliament is not even meeting. Can you tell us a bit about that? Because I feel like this is something that a lot of people actually are not aware of, or not as aware as they probably should be.
Yeah, so let me just get my calendar up so I can get my dates straight. So,
Sure.
All right. So, yeah, Parliament sat on, when was it? Oh, sorry, I'm getting my dates wrong. Anyway, the last Tuesday, Parliament sat, and for a very short time, hang on, trying to get all my dates right here. No, sorry, on the 17th of August, there was a sitting of Parliament, and anyway, doesn't matter. The Parliament has been shut down. So last time we came into Parliament, we had to come in unless there was unanimous agreement amongst all MPs. We had to come in because there's a date set in the Legislative Council. And the very first item of business on the agenda for the government was to adjourn Parliament. So to adjourn it and to also put in a date, but also give them the ability to act on health advice and cancel it as long as possible. Now, I said rather jokingly, but I was sort of serious as well. If the motion had have been to adjourn Parliament until February, I would have wholeheartedly supported it because it would have mean the emergency powers would have expired by that point and they couldn't use them anymore. But of course, they'll figure out a way to get us back there before the emergency powers expire and they need to do something else even more horrible. But Parliament's not sitting. So, I mean, lots of things that happen in Parliament are, they pass laws that I don't like and I don't, I'd rather not pass the laws and so I vote against them. But one of the important things of Parliament is to provide some sort of scrutiny as well, ask ministers questions about things and do all this sort of stuff. And usually the answers you get aren't very great. But, the federal Parliament's been able to sit remotely. I think the only really tricky thing is voting. There's constitutional issues around, how would you manage a vote remotely and make sure that it's valid according to our Victorian Constitution. But as far as asking questions and stuff like that, it could still happen. But anyway, I don't know when Parliament's going to sit again, but I'm still working anyway. I'm at Parliament now. Committee hearings are still running. So we had the I Cook Foods inquiry, the last public hearing of that today.
Tell me a little bit more about that, because Chief Health Officer Brett Sutton is tied up in that. So, and I missed it. I didn't see any of it. Could you? We have discussed I Cook Foods previously, but I'm just aware the viewership turns over, so there'll be people not really familiar with it. Could you give us the Cliff Notes short version on what we actually know so far, and then update us on what actually happened today?
Oh, yeah. All right. So, the business I Cook Foods was shut down in 2019 by the Chief Health Officer at the time, which was Professor Brett Sutton. At that time, no one probably knew who he was. He wasn't a famous guy like he is now.
Yeah.
Now, the reason that they were shut down is because there was a poor, unfortunate woman who was in a hospital in Knox, and she died of she contracted listeriosis, or she got a disease from listeria, which is the type of food poisoning.
Yeah.
And anyway, the statement made by Professor Sutton at the time to the media was that, it was along the lines of, he named I Cook Foods, they issued a closure order, and the business was shut down, and basically the business was destroyed, and it was pretty awful for them. Now, they vigorously disputed that they were the source here. They questioned why other sources weren't investigated, because the hospital didn't, and the reason that the inquiry was reopened was because it was discovered that there was actually multiple sources of multiple suppliers, not just I Cook Foods.
They weren't the exclusive supplier.
They weren't the exclusive supplier, and so it shouldn't have been so certain that it was them, is the thinking, I suppose. And I suppose the inquiry is trying to get to the truth of the matter of, what really went down. There was also allegations of there was a business set up by Dandenong City Council, which was Community Chef, which, anyway, the reason that Professor Sutton had to shut it down and not the council, because the council normally could have done it, that the CEO of the council was also on the board of Community Chef, which they considered was a conflict of interest because they actually competed with I Cook Foods. That's why the Chief Health Officer had to do it rather than the council themselves.
Yeah.
And so there was all these allegations of, corruption and all this sort of thing, and we're still trying to get to the bottom of it. Lots of things have been said under parliamentary privilege that I wouldn't repeat.
That's fine.
Look, it's a very intriguing case, and I'm really trying to get to the bottom of it. But the thing that struck me the most was this idea that, there was, at the time, Professor Sutton said, there could be thousands of people that could could die, could potentially die from listeria and all this. So we need to shut down this business. It caused total devastation for the business, lost 41 jobs, lifetime's work, all that sort of stuff. And in the end, only one person got it, right? And I was thinking, wow, it's like, feels like what we've been doing for the last 18 months, and so I found it very intriguing, and that's why I have been joining in the inquiries, because I want to know the truth. Like that's my goal here, is to try and do what I can to ask questions, but I don't get a vote on the report. I'm what's called a participating member in the inquiry, so it means I can go to the hearings, I can suggest things for the report, and I can ask questions, but I don't actually get to vote on the report or anything. So
let me add a couple of things that I'm aware of happening through this saga, and I'll say my opinions are my own and are in no way necessarily agreed with by David as a member of Parliament. He needs to be very circumspect about what he says and how he says it. So let me add a few things that are true in my understanding and in my opinion. They did do an investigation on the business, and one of the big things that happened was they found a slug.
Actually, it was a slug. Yeah, that's why they call it Sluggate. Yeah.
Sluggate, yeah. And now my understanding is, and I emphasize this is my understanding, it is now accepted and has been accepted actually in a court proceeding that slug was planted. So there is now actually an accepted view, is my understanding, that someone was trying to take down the business for some reason. Now, of course, you can draw some very quick lines from there to Dandenong Council, to Brett Sutton, to other people. Those need to be established in law. They need to be proven, because everyone is innocent until proven guilty, even the people that we don't like. That's the point, right?
Yeah.
So these things need to actually be established with evidence. But it's very, very clear that something untoward has happened, and it's my understanding that that is now accepted at a judicial level, that was the case. Now,
well, yeah. Look, we've heard directly contradictory evidence on the slug thing. So, it's. I took part in the first inquiry as well that happened last year.
Yeah,
and it seemed strange to me because this was all happening in February. Now, I don't claim to be an expert on entomology and all that sort of thing, but it seems strange that in the middle of summer there was this slug there, right? Like, how did it get there? And I was asking questions about that, and I said, is this normal to see slugs in summer? And have you ever seen this before? And it was like, no. And because you go out in the garden in winter, there's slugs everywhere, right? But you never see them on a 40-degree day. And apparently outside the factory, it's all concrete and stuff. You can imagine how hot it is in summer. Like, you're not going to see slugs going along the red hot concrete. So it just seemed weird to me. But there's been, the person that was accused of planning it claims absolutely did not. So, I don't know. People have given directly contradictory testimony. Maybe it's going to have to go through the courts before we actually find the truth, which is unfortunate. But
here's the other thing that strikes me, though. I spent 7 years working at a place called Costa Logistics, and we had all the fruit and veg that went to Coles in Victoria, Tasmania, and parts of New South Wales and South Australia came through the DC in the western suburbs of Melbourne. I worked there for 7 years. I started as a picker-packer on the floor and went up into the lower levels of management in my time there. We continuously had food coming through that had great, pre-packed lettuces and things where a picker would notice, oh, there's an animal in here. We had tarantulas showing up in weird places. At one point, we had a snake show up in a box of bananas, right, which could easily have been just shipped off to the store with the snake still in it, but the snake decided to come crawling out of the box while it was in the DC. These things are happening all the time. And to me, yes, okay, we expect everyone supplying food to maintain the highest possible levels of cleanliness and hygiene, etc. However, there comes a point where the cost to absolutely guarantee perfect hygiene is so high that we would never be able to afford the food. People want to say, like, if you had to go through, open up every single box of bananas and double check that there wasn't a tarantula, there wasn't a snake in there wasn't a bug or a weevil or whatever there might be in there, the man hours involved in that would make the cost of bananas completely unaffordable. And so we come back to the same thing that we were talking about before with the road toll. We have to accept a certain level of responsibility and a certain level of risk. And if we don't, then we will not be able to afford to eat. It's not as though there's no cost to these sorts of mandates. So I find the whole thing very, very strange. And as you say, it's probably going to take a very long time before this actually plays out. All right. I'm reading the questions as they're coming through, and I want to bring up a consistent theme in the questions, and that is, how do we come back from this? I mean, we are where we are. We can't change history. We can't change what's been done. What's the road back? How the hell do we get from where we are back to even 2019, let alone towards something like what you or I might like to see, where a lot of power is returned back to the individual, lower taxes, lower regulation, that sort of thing? Like, given our political system is what it is, how do we even move in that direction?
Yeah, all right. So the first thing that you need to do is have an alternate plan or an alternate idea, and that's what our party's been doing. So I've been talking about the idea of Freedom Day. So we've got a fairly well-developed policy.
Talk about that. There's a lot of people that don't know about that yet.
So the idea of Freedom Day is that we've got restrictions and things like this at the moment, but we set a line in the sand and we say after this date, and we've chosen December 4th, first weekend of summer.
Can I just say December 3rd is a missed opportunity. December 3rd is the anniversary of the Eureka Stockade.
No, I know.
Missed opportunity, but anyway.
It's a Friday though, so it's bad. But anyway, yeah. Many people.
Sorry,
have that,
I've sidetracked.
Yeah. But the idea is that you need to give people enough time to choose if they want to take the vaccine or not, and we acknowledge that. And choice is two ways, right? Some people don't want to take it. Some people do want to take it. You can't say that you support choice if a vaccine isn't available for someone, right? So we support choice. And so people will have, by that time, we think that everyone will have had the ability to choose whether or not they want to take the vaccine, have made their choices, and then we open up and we say, okay, well, you either take your chances with the virus or you take your chances with the vaccine. It's your choice. But ultimately, we can't live like this forever. And so that's what our plan is, basically, to try and set a deadline on what they're doing with the emergency powers. They're talking about things returning back to normal as if some things are just going to reappear, but there's so many things now that are looking more and more permanent. Do you know what I mean? Like, so we have to say we're not willing to accept this sort of permanent restrictions on our liberty. People need to say we want to go back to the old normal. In fact, we want better protections than the old normal gave us, because we've realised that those protections in many ways aren't working or have failed. And we have to properly look at what have the costs really been of what we've done, and I think they'll become self-evident. They already are. I think we reached the tipping point yesterday. So yesterday the cult of COVID zero died in Australia.
And boy, was I happy to see that. Yeah.
So that was a big tipping point. People had this sort of almost cult-like idea. They had cult leaders. People had masks with Brett Sutton on their mask and stuff. And we can reach this donut day. And like we've got these, even the symbology of the donuts for this new religion that they've created. And
it's insane.
It was totally unattainable, right? Because ultimately, you look at every country throughout the world, and we think that somehow we're special and we can just keep the virus out forever. But of course, that's not going to happen. Ultimately, we have to do battle with it. The question is really, how do we do battle with it? And there's vaccines available, and if people want to choose that, there are other therapies that they're talking about as well. They've got improved treatment in hospitals and things like this. But I mean, they said early on, the plan was, to give them a bit of time to ramp up their ICU capacity because they were expecting
the hospital capacity. That was the argument at the beginning.
Yeah, and they said that, like, there was a media release from the previous health minister saying they get 4,000 ICU beds or something nationally, or some massive number of ICU beds, and yet this week they're talking about there was 15 people in ICU or something, and we're like overstretched, and I'm like, what happened to all that preparation and that we were talking about?
I can only contribute a rumor at this point. I'm trying behind the scenes to get some verification of this, but I haven't been able to yet. The rumor that I am hearing, and I would put it above the level of rumor, but I'm certainly not going to say it's been demonstrated yet, is two things are happening. Number one, hospital systems are struggling because of their own COVID-safe requirements. It's destroyed the efficiencies within the hospital itself, so they just cannot actually see as many patients as what they could without all those conditions in place. Secondly, I'm being told that there is an inordinate number of people who are taking extended sick leave or other, long service leave or other things that they're owed within the hospital system in order to delay having to have vaccines themselves, because their choice as an individual is that they don't necessarily want to do that. So there is apparently a significant staffing issue, and I'm hearing that from a few different nurses, some of whom are saying that they are continuing to work, but they're getting called in all the time to cover shifts and so forth, that the hospital capacity issue is actually in part a staffing shortage issue is what I'm hearing at the moment. I cannot, and I don't expect you to know one way or the other. But
I have some insight into this.
Okay.
But I don't know about, I'm not sure about, vaccine hesitancy amongst nurses. Some have contacted me and said that they're not happy about this or whatever. But I mean, I think there's a few factors here. One is that emergency departments are overloaded, and one big reason for that is that many GP clinics won't see people with respiratory issues because they're concerned it might be COVID. And so there are some like respiratory specialist places that will still do that, but many people are going to emergency departments, right? So for treatment. And so that's the first issue. Now, if you've got a chronic respiratory issue like, COPD or asthma or cancer or something like that, you could imagine the difficulty every time you needed to go to the doctor to get treatment.
It'd be a nightmare.
It would be a nightmare. And another issue is there's been and they were talking about it today, finally, a very large number of people presenting to emergency departments with self-harm, which is awful, including many, many children. And so emergency departments are in, like, it's the most sickening irony that the whole rationale for the lockdowns was to stop our hospital system being overloaded, and yet the restrictions themselves are causing the hospital system to be overloaded in different ways than what they were thinking. But certainly emergency departments are suffering. I've heard lots of stories of staff not coping very well. But in the mental health sector, they had this Royal Commission. They because this is a critical issue at the moment. They've said they're spending millions and millions and millions and billions and billions of dollars on mental health, and yet my understanding is that the EBA negotiations with the unions are breaking down. They're not getting the staff that they need. Like, what's happening with all that money? Like, I mean, and they were saying, and I was asking about this in estimates. They were saying, we're going to have we're going to have money for psychologists in every school, and I'm like, where are these psychologists going to come from? Like, and you just got to just click your fingers and come up with thousands of psychologists. Like, it's not that easy.
And can we just pause for a second? If your policies are creating the need to have psychologists in every school, maybe that should be a reality check about your policies. There's another quote, I don't remember who first said this, but talking about how the government breaks your legs and then hands you a crutch and says, hey, isn't it good that we were here to give you a crutch, right? And this is what's happening now. They've created these problems. And there's a truism that I think is reasonably well accepted amongst libertarian circles, but not widely known outside of that. And that is that government programs usually achieve the opposite of what they were designed to achieve. And I'll give a completely unrelated example. So I used to be a John Howard fanboy, right? I grew up as a conservative, and John Howard, anything that came out of his mouth, he was basically he was next to Jesus, right? There was God, there was Jesus, and then there was John Howard. So when he turned around and he said, hey, we're going to help people to afford to buy their own home. And so we're going to create the first homeowners grant, right? That's going to help people who can't save a deposit to get into their own home. And that's going to make housing more affordable. That was the intent with the policy. Well, what happens if you understand anything about economics? It's a continuous dance between supply and demand, right? And that's what drives prices. If demand is outstripping supply, prices will rise, sometimes very quickly, and vice versa. If demand is not adequate for the amount of supply on the market, prices will drop, sometimes very quickly. So when you try and fix a supply and demand imbalance, demand is too high, house prices are too high. So what we're going to do is we're going to help more people to get into the market to increase demand even further. That was his solution. Now, of course, he didn't put it in those terms, but if you actually look at it economically, that's what he did. And ultimately, what we've seen now, where house prices are more unreachable than ever before, was actually a direct consequence of his attempt to make housing more affordable. So that's an unrelated example, but here we're seeing another example. They were trying to protect the hospital system and save lives. And I would argue that if you look in quality of life adjusted years, we've lost more life than what would have happened had they taken a much more, in my opinion, sensible approach to COVID. and the hospital capacity is now being stretched as a result of their policies. They're ultimately achieving sort of the opposite of what they set out to achieve. So in terms of, okay, Freedom Day, fantastic. I'm all on board. I mean, I'd love to see things happen a lot sooner than that, but you know what? We've got to be politically realistic. Okay, it's no good me sitting here, old man yells at clouds kind of idea, right? There's no point in me spouting whatever that just isn't politically achievable. Unfortunately, the solutions that we put forward and agitate for need to be politically achievable.
Well, you need time to convince people as well that that's a good idea.
Yeah,
right?
correct.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
You can't just, like people said, oh, it should be tomorrow. I said, well, okay, I'll wake up tomorrow morning and fail. And that I think we need to be
100%.
realistic
100%.
and
But and it takes time for people to realize just how dangerous these times are. I mean, when I spoke at the very first protest that I spoke at on Anzac Day in 2020, what's that now, 15 odd months ago, we had 70 people turn up. Now, when I go to protests in the city, we've got 10,000 people showing up. And it took time. More and more people, and there's a huge proportion of those people have never been to protests before. They've been jolted. They've been jolted out of that comfortable apathy, that disinterest in politics by what's been happening. So you're absolutely right. There is time needed. We are a country that is not supposed to be run by a small number of people just making executive decisions. And so equally, you and I can't just make an executive decision and make things happen. That's not how any of this kind of works. So we just have to be realistic about that. It does take time. But let's assume Freedom Day goes well. We can put all that stuff behind us. We've still got the reality. Number one, there is nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. Just that reality that all of the powers they've given themselves are not going to magically go away. And the next time there's any kind of a health crisis, we're likely to ramp back up to this kind of level of restrictions very quickly. In future, they've done it before. It's set a precedent now. But then we've got all the other realities of what Western and Australian and Victorian government has become over the last 60 years, the amount of power that they've now arrogated to themselves. So what do we do in the bigger picture? Like, let's put COVID to one side for a second. How do we actually start to return power back to the people where it belongs?
Well, politically, from our point of view, it's getting more people elected to Parliament who are willing to defend liberty, and that's what it's all about. A political party, the whole point is you have a set of ideas, then you try and get people elected according to those ideas, people who are going to defend those ideas.
Hold those ideas,
and then you need more of them. So we're working really hard on that, both in the federal campaign that's going to be coming up, and then next year with the state campaign that's coming up.
That's only in March, April, or May, I think, is the federal election. I think that's their window.
Yeah, it'll be
that,
sometime around then. We don't know exactly, but I think the latest would be around May or something.
So in Victoria, we've actually got a federal election followed by a state election, which is an interesting opportunity to potentially affect quite a lot of change in a fairly short space of time.
Yeah, so we've been, advertising our ideas a lot. So, we did the banner thing. We issued a declaration of war in the newspaper, pretty much. I don't know whether you would have seen that, but
nice.
A letter to our leadership.
Okay.
Basically saying that zero COVID's failed.
Yep.
Quite prophetic, because this was a few weeks ago. So
nice.
Yeah, we said basically our policy. Putting our policy out there, ensuring vaccines are available and voluntary, no coercion or vaccine passports, phasing out lockdowns and prohibiting any new lockdowns, opening our state borders, opening our schools, bring Australians home. I think it's outrageous that we have Australian citizens and residents with passports that are effectively prevented from entering our country, and protecting free speech and facilitating protests. Now, On the protest thing, I think what you're seeing at the moment, like the protesters that go at the moment, they're the most hardcore of the hard, because they know the risks. They're desperate, right? They know the risks they're taking. They know how hard police literally started shooting at them with less lethal weapons the other week.
I was there. I was not far away, and I heard the popping sounds, and I was about 5 layers deep. It happened at a moment where I'd approached the front of the crowd. If you watch my live streams, I tend to try and stay out of trouble. I'm not interested in being in the face of some police officer. But I moved towards where there was a confrontation happening, and sort of got close, got a couple of shots, and I started to move back. And if you rewatch the footage, you can hear these popping sounds, and my brain didn't recognize what they were at the time. I'm ex-reserve infantry. I know what gunfire sounds like, and it didn't sound like gunfire to me. It sounded like maybe more tear gas popping off or something like that. And I only found out later on when Matt Lawson, who was the one who was shot with I believe it was a rubber projectile. It might have been a beanbag. I'm not entirely sure. Came to me while I was still live streaming. You can see that as well, and reported to me what had happened to him. And of course, he has his own footage as well. That's gone viral. It's an incredibly surreal thing to see that happening and that level of force being used. What's the downside in letting us march around? Like, this is about ego now, it seems to me. This is about the government needing to show their force and show their authority. There's no practical outcome apart from intimidation.
Like the less lethal weapon thing has been a big concern of mine for like long before the pandemic. I think that the normalization of the use of pepper spray and similar irritant type chemicals is outrageous. I think it's basically, just considered, standard practice to give a spray to a whole bunch of protesters, right?
Kids, whatever.
But then that was a dramatic escalation. I've seen footage last weekend. I haven't identified exactly what the weapons are, but it looks like 3 different types of weapons were used. One was the non-lethal pepper projectile weapon. Another one looks like some type of baton round or beanbag launcher or rubber bullet or whatever you want to call it. But it's like, that's the one that Matt, I think his name was, got in the stomach and pretty serious looking injury. And the other one that I've seen video evidence of was tear gas canisters launches.
I can confirm the tear gas. No doubt about that. Again, my time in the Army Reserve, we trained on tear gas. I know exactly what that feels like. And on 2 separate occasions during that protest, there is no doubt that there was tear gas in the air.
Now, what was even more concerning was that rather than alarm at this, which I felt alarm. And this is one of the reasons I do want Parliament opening again, because I got lots of questions about what they've been doing here. I want to know what's going, what made them use these weapons. But they were getting cheered on, like people, and it's what's the next step? Like live ammo, like that's the next step, right?
They've literally gone up to the point where there is no further escalation barring live ammo. That is, they've used
those baton rounds. Those baton rounds, if they hit you in the guts, you saw the pictures. I saw the pictures. Terrible injury. I read that he had some torn abdominal injury. But if they hit you in the chest, they can very likely kill you. If they hit you in the head, they can very likely kill you. If they hit a child, very likely kill them. They're not called non-lethal weapons. They're called less lethal.
Less lethal, weapons. Correct.
So very, very even the pepper round things. If they get you in the eye or something, they can be very, very serious. But they're getting cheered on, and I think this is a very concerning development. That's why I think it was last night I took a crack at the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission because they were talking about gender pay gaps, and I said, you guys are still stuck in the pre-pandemic era. We have the government's opened fire on its own citizens with less lethal weapons. We've got some serious problems here that maybe they seem quite happy to say that mandatory masks wasn't a breach of human rights, but they don't seem willing to call out opening fire on your own citizens. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, it doesn't know what you think of the protesters. And I got criticized that I've always been concerned about government overreach with protests. And the very first protest I went to during the pandemic was not an anti-lockdown protest. It was the Black Lives Matter march. And I was very concerned that the police were going to overreact. I was very concerned. And I wanted to hear the messages, what people had to say, because, you know, I don't trust everything that I see on the news. I know how it works. I want to see for myself. And I felt it's my job to witness it. And to my surprise, the police were fantastic. They were very professional. They facilitated people's right to freedom of assembly. And this was at a time when groups of gatherings of more than 20 people were prohibited.
Correct.
I think they estimated 10 to 15,000 people there.
A lot more than 20. Yep.
Yeah. There's a lot of people there.
Yeah.
It was also said that I think it was reported in the media that there were 6 COVID positive people at the protest. Yeah. And I requested from the health minister, and I still have the evidence. I said, what evidence is there of transmissions at the protest? Is there any evidence? And there was no transmissions attributed to the protest, not a single one.
And that was in the media as well.
Naively, rather, you know, me being naive again, I naively thought, okay, well, the government's actually handled this pretty well. Like a bunch of people have had some concerns. They've come out, they've said their concerns. They've tried to facilitate, masks and hand sanitizer and stuff like that. The police, they were ready for trouble, no doubt about it. And, you know, there was, at every protest, there's always a couple of crazy people. There was a few crazy people who caused trouble at the Black Lives Matter march as well. You know, there's a couple of people arrested, but, you know, most people were they were fine. And I thought, okay, well, you know, this is okay. But then I started seeing what was happening with different protests, and I went along to a few different ones. I went along to another one which was actually in support of the people of Hong Kong. Yep. And that was really well organized, and that was facilitated quite well. And, you know, they were trying to, you know, adhere to the directions as best they could. But the police allowed that to go ahead, and I thought that was good too. But then there was the anti-lockdown protesters, and I started seeing people treated very, very badly. And so I went along to witness some, and I went along to the Cup Day one, and I got caught in the kettle with lots of, hundreds of other people, which is ironic because the whole thing was to stop people gathering in groups, and they forced us all into this tight circle, and we were stuck there for hours. And of course,
drinking water out of a bucket.
Yeah. Well, I mean, no one was prepared to stay there for hours. I was only prepared to stay there for half an hour, an hour. I wanted to see what was going on. Yep. I was trapped, and I didn't want to pull the do you know who I am card, but I was trying to engage, engage with police, and they ignored me. They ignored everyone who tried to engage with them. They surrounded them. They ignored them, and then eventually, after hours in the sun, it was they got us under the shade a bit, but it was
nevertheless,
they put sunscreen on themselves and stuff. I wasn't prepared. I didn't bring water or anything. They were taking them out one by one and processing them. So it's and I was quite shocked at the way that these people were treated, and the way that they were demonized by the Premier and by the media. I thought was disgusting. Yes, of course, there was a few out there people there, but a lot of the people that I spoke to, they were people that they were parents who were worried about their kids. They were small business people who'd had their businesses destroyed, people who'd lost their jobs. There were people concerned about human rights. These are entirely legitimate reasons to have concerns in a democratic system and to try and express those concerns. And like those court cases are coming up soon. So I got processed the same as everyone else. And one of my staff members was with me as well. But for whatever reason, I never got a fine. It was the first fine in my life I was looking forward to receiving because but they never sent it to me. I wanted to take it all the way. But and I had an army of very high profile legal people that were willing to help me, but they must have seen that coming and decided, no, that's not a good idea. But the responses have been all over the place, because I've spoken to many people from that day, and a lot of them were like me and just never got one for whatever reason. They did say that they had problems with their computer system on the day, and I think that's why everyone was stuck there for so long, because it wasn't working properly. They were trying to use some tablet system to process me, and then the tablet system didn't work, and then they ended up just writing it down on a bit of paper or something, and it was just crazy. So anyway, some people got their fines. They got sent another letter saying that the fine was issued incorrectly and it's been withdrawn. Other people asked for their fine to be reviewed, and the fine was withdrawn on review. And other people have said, no, you're going to court. So I don't know why all the people were treated differently. It's possibly due to, it was said to me that they were treated differently because it's effectively up to the officer to make the call on whether to go ahead with it or not. And because there's lots of different police, maybe that's why you get this sort of almost seemingly random effect. So like,
I've been issued 2 fines so far. One was sent to me in the mail after I spoke at the Anzac Day protest in 2020. I opted to have that taken to court, and they withdrew that one. The other one was the cops showed up at my door on the Friday before the protest that was on the 24th of July, I think it was, two protests ago, to try and intimidate me out of going. I went anyway, and then they showed up at my door again on the Monday after the protest. It was quite funny. They said to me, "Oh, we've been reviewing the police footage from the day, and we saw that you were at the protest." And they were obviously wanting me to incriminate myself, to admit that I was there, right? And I just said, "Well, you didn't have to look at your footage. You just could have looked at my page. Like, I was live streaming. I'm not going to play games with you. I'm there. I'm exercising my human rights." And they asked me, "Oh, why were you there?" I said, "Because it's my human right to protest if I'm not happy with what the government is doing and the policies they've got in place." And they left at that point because they got what they wanted. And then they sent me a letter in the mail, and I have returned that one as well and said I'd like this to go to court, and I'm awaiting the outcome of that. I was disappointed, though, when I got the fine, because I'm wanting a fine for incitement or something like that, something that I can really get my teeth into with a legal challenge in return. But all I did was the fine that they sent me was just for being outside of my 5-kilometer area, which is annoying. Anyway, so we'll see. We'll see what happens with that, and I'll keep my page updated as things progress. But these things tend to take months in between each sort of step in the process. Now, I made a deal with my viewers after my very first slow chat that I would always have a toilet break, because some people were very unhappy with me that we went for, 3 hours or something like that, and we never paused. So I'm gonna have a toilet break. I'm gonna play for you, and it's actually gonna work this time. Fingers crossed. The Infectious Diseases Hall of Fame video, and the audio should actually work this time. 3rd time's the charm. I've tried this twice before. I believe I've got the problem sorted. So I'm going to play that for you. I'm going to run to the loo. I'm going to refill my my mug of tea, and we'll reconvene, because David, I want to go a little bit deeper into what actually drives you. What's, we talk about this libertarian concept. What does it even mean, and how could it look? What would that, if you and I had our way, what would it even look like? And just helping people to start to understand a little bit of that. So that's what we've got coming up after a couple of minute breaks. So go and have a break, and then make sure you do come back. We'll see you very, very shortly. Aha! At last. A dream come true. I've been waiting a long time for this. Mind you, judging by the invitation, I was expecting something a little fancier. You have an invitation? Yes, of course. You can't get in here without an invitation. Mr. Statism. Statism, if you don't mind. Statism. Never heard of you. That is why I am so deadly. And who are you? Only the deadliest pandemic in the history of mankind. Unprecedented, they called me. Well, I am a big fan of your work. You've killed 300 million people. If you don't mind me saying so, you aren't quite what I expected the bubonic plague to look like. The bubonic plague?
Why does everyone keep saying bubonic plague?
Oh, well, because you did say that you were the deadliest pandemic in the history of mankind, so...
Not that one.
Oh, the smallpox?
No.
Spanish flu?
No.
Plague of Justinian?
Do I look like I'm 1,500 years old?
HIV.
Oh, for hell's sake, I'm COVID-19.
You're COVID-19. Ah.
Yes.
How many people have you killed?
Nearly 4 million.
Oh, yes. Yes. You're not even in the top 5. It's not even close.
But I'm not finished yet.
Neither am I.
Fine. How many people have you killed, Mr. Statism?
State-ism. 100 million and counting.
You what?
100 million and counting. Second deadliest infectious disease in history.
You're not an infectious disease.
Oh, but I am. And actually, I should be thanking you. You're the reason I got this invitation.
What even are you?
Statism. I'm the cause of genocide, when governments kill their own people.
Like the Holocaust and stuff?
Certainly, all the genocides, plus the man-made famines, all the political purges and all that stuff.
You're a Nazi.
And communist, and a progressive, and a conservative, the whole lot. Anyone that wants to give the government more power is on my side. From Mao's Great Leap Forward to the war on drugs, to the Spanish Inquisition. I bet you didn't expect that.
How is any of that an infectious disease?
That's where you come in. I've been arguing for centuries that an idea like statism is the most infectious disease of all. Sadly, despite my outstanding body count, my arguments were falling on deaf ears. Until you came along.
I'm a proper infectious disease. I spread around the world and I'm killing people on every continent.
Yes, but since you showed up, I've been spreading even faster. Thanks to you, governments have been given more power than ever before. And I am rather proud of this, even in free countries where they thought they were immune to me.
Governments in free countries aren't going to start killing their own people.
That's the spirit. You've got nothing to worry about. That sort of thing can't happen here. We're a free country. Jolly good.
I'm a real virus. I am mutating into new variants all the time, and they are never going to be able to get rid of me.
You and me both. But you're nearly finished. And I have a feeling that my best years are yet to come.
Ah, Mr. Statism, welcome. We've been expecting you. Hi, I'm COVID-19. I think my invitation must have got stuck in the Suez Canal. I'm here to...
Alrighty, that was a very short break. I hope it was long enough for you all. So that's my little take on, I guess, a Monty Python-esque look at what's been happening in terms of the growth of government. And it's very obvious the growth of government that's happened since the start of 2020 when COVID-19 responses started to come in. But in reality, this is actually a continuation of a trend that's been going on for decades and decades. So David, this is where I'd love to kind of pick your brain a little bit, because you've come from the opposite end of the political spectrum to me, but we've ended up in a fairly similar place. In layman's terms, what would a libertarian government look like? How would that differ from what we're all so used to today?
So I think one of the things that people make mistakes about in politics, and I made the mistake, and I guess maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe you made a mistake as well in the past, is thinking of this utopian vision. What does this vision actually look like? Yeah. I don't know exactly what a free society, a totally free society looks like. I don't know the choices that people are going to make. Yep. But the way I see it is that when we have to be moving in a direction, right? We're either moving towards, like as you talked about in the video, more statism, or more and more state control over people's lives, or more and more control of the individual over their own life. And it was described to me once that there's like a spectrum, right? And on the one hand, you've got the dictatorship, and
there you go. We can see your hands now.
On the one hand, you've got the dictatorship. Now, the problem with the dictatorship is that the government is a danger to the people, right? Yeah. Like, as you well aware and pointed out. But then if you've got this sort of complete and total anarchy, then the problem is people are a danger to each other. And so you have to find this balance where the government is doing this role of, protecting people from each other, like by using force, fraud, theft and crime, criminal activity, like people hurting each other.
Yeah.
I'm not an anarchist. I know some people are, but I'm not an anarchist. I don't think there should be no government. I think that there is a valid role for government to protect people from each other, but government shouldn't be protecting people from themselves.
Yes.
Okay. And so what we need to look at, and this is where I think that this is the role of the Liberal Democrats, is to defend this idea of moving towards less government control in people's lives, and where they try and do it, to resist it as best we can. And the way that we do that is through increasing the size of the party, the number of elected members, but also through what we do in talking to people through the media, through people like yourself, to try and convince them that too much government control in their life is dangerous. It's dangerous to them, it's dangerous to their families, and it's dangerous to our country.
Yeah.
And I think people see that more than ever now. They never really realized how much power our governments really have.
Yeah.
And we're locked in our, like everyone in Victoria pretty much is locked in their homes at the moment. They can't see their family. They can't do all these things. Now, what's happened, and I think you alluded to it before, we've been talking about risk a lot tonight, right? What's happened during the pandemic in real terms is that people normally manage risks themselves. Business owners, they're experts at managing risk. Starting a business is a risk, right? A restaurateur, when they open up a restaurant, they're managing risks all the time. Like they're worried about, food safety. They don't want to poison their customers, right? So they're worried about all these different types of risks, financial risks, and all these sorts of things. But what's happened during the pandemic is that the government has taken on all those risks themselves and taken away the ability of individuals to manage risk. And people have seen the negative effects of that, because the government's top-down control methods are very necessarily brutal and cracking a nut with a sledgehammer type thing.
Yeah, they're
right?
a blunt instrument.
They can't take into account the individual circumstances of each person's life, and therefore they cause all these harms to people when they have these blunt instruments. And they keep promising to give us back our freedoms, but actually it's getting worse and worse and worse. We need to push back against it.
Can I pause you there? If they can be taken away and given back, then they're not freedoms in the first place, right? If they're in the hands of our leaders, our rulers, to grant or not grant, then they are government permissions. They're not freedoms in the first place. So what they're actually saying is, you have no freedoms. You only have what we give you permission to have. Now, you make a good point, and I want to go slightly deeper into this. There is this spectrum of thought, and you've got someone like a libertarian. Then you probably a little bit further on than them, you've got someone who might be described as a minarchist. Then probably a voluntarist and an anarchist, and the lines between those groups are all very blurry, and it's not really clear who which camp anyone necessarily sits in. And I find it very frustrating that a lot of energy amongst us, I'm going to say us, gets invested in this argument about whether anarchism is better than voluntarism, is different. How is it different? And whether that's, oh no, you're only a minarchist, so you're actually a sellout, blah, blah, blah. Forget all of that. Right now, we're arguing over here, here, and here. And right now, we're about a kilometer that way, right?
Yeah, I never engage in those arguments. I think they're silly. To my view, anyone that thinks that government should have less control over people's lives than they do now is a libertarian.
Yes, and let's all work together to actually make a change rather than arguing with each other. It frustrates me so much.
It's as simple as that. If you think that there should be less control over people's lives by the government, then you're on our side, basically. And, maybe one day when we get to a certain point, we can argue about, whether you want to jump off the bus or something. But
yeah,
but we're so far away from that it's
right.
pointless. I'm arguing. I'm trying to open playgrounds for kids and open schools. Right? It's like this is what we've been reduced to.
Goodness.
So
there is a saying that in my experiences, I've been talking to people about politics, and I began to get politically active about 15 years ago, and I became a political commentator and an activist about 12 years ago. So I've had a lot of these sorts of conversations. One of the things that I've discovered, everyone is a libertarian in at least one area in their life. You talk to absolutely anyone for long enough, and you will find that one area where they go, oh, the government's completely wrong about that. They shouldn't be doing this. They shouldn't be doing that. They should just let people do what they want. For some people, that might be marijuana. For some people, that might be, starting a business. It's a different thing for different people, but everyone's a libertarian in one area in their life. And what's really interesting is people tend to remain, and we've reflected on this already, but people tend to remain very inactive politically until they get hurt in that one area that they really care about. And this is where I think there might be a silver lining in what's gone on. And it is only a silver lining. I mean, what's gone on has been terrible and destructive and has hurt so many people. But because it's hurt so many people, I think we're seeing a lot more people becoming politically active than we've ever seen in Australia before. We've almost been proud of our political apathy. Culturally, we've almost been proud of that. Oh no, I don't pay attention to politics. That's all. I can't change it. It just is what it is. Whatever. I think a lot of people are beginning to actually get a bit more politically active. So I'm mindful that I'm talking to an elected member of Parliament. So let me give you a free kick here to spruik what you're doing and what the Liberal Democrats are doing. For people that are now for the first time going, hey, I'm not happy and I want to see something change. What can someone actually do that might help to make, each of us can't make a huge difference on our own, but all of us together, it adds up. So what's that little difference that people can make?
I think there's lots of, obviously we're limited at the moment because we can't leave our houses, but we can talk to other people about pro-liberty ideas. So things about, question what, when you're talking with your friends and stuff, should the government be having this sort of control on people's lives? If you want to get more involved, you can join a political party, and we've had lots of people join us. You can make commentary on social media. You can do things like what you're doing and talk to people about these ideas. And I think you raised a great point that everyone's libertarian on. There's a joke that everyone agrees with libertarians on 50% of our issues. But I think what it comes down to is there's this mindset in people's minds that things that they don't like should be prohibited by the government. And this is the most cancerous idea. Yes. And this is the idea that we need to attack. We need, if we're going to live in a free society, we need to live in a tolerant society. We need to tolerate the idea that if we live in a free society, there are going to be people that do things that we don't like or don't approve of, but shouldn't necessarily be intervened in by the state if they're not harming other people. And you brought up an example, cannabis. I mean, there's many different examples of this, but I think that this is a cancerous idea that we've got, that if I don't like it, it should be banned. And you often hear this joke about progressives. They say everything I don't like should be banned, and everything I like is a human right.
That's right.
The whole idea of if you look at the American Bill of Rights and things like this, the idea of it is not for the government to grant people things; it's to restrict the government. Right? That's what rights are really about. Is putting limitations on government power. And like I said, I've been disappointed at the limitations, the charter and stuff that we've got in Victoria, how it's sort of failed in that respect. In my view. So I think there are things that people can do still, but I think attacking this idea that people. Everything that you don't like should be banned, I think is the number one thing. And and accept that, you know, in a free society, that's okay. Like, that's okay to discuss these things. And, you know, if you don't like something that someone's doing, you don't have to associate with them. You don't have to approve of what they're doing. Like, people often say, because, you know, we talk about, you know, drug issues, that we're promoting drugs, or if we're talking about, you know, defending people's rights to protest, that we support those particular protesters or whatever. That's not true at all. Like, we're defending people's rights to make choices as adults. And that's what we're really talking about, I think. And, you know, and if people, you know, agree with that, then, you know, we're the party that, you know, we're founded on that idea.
Keith is asking, is the lack of rights now the most important constitutional issue in Australia? It's certainly right up there. In the current climate, I think it's hard to argue that there's any more pressing issue than this idea that the government can do whatever it wants, and our rights are actually optional. They're not rights at all. You're far too humble, David. I tried to give you a free kick to Spruick, getting people to sign up to the party and stand on polling booths and hand out.
Yes, you can definitely do all that. I mean, ultimately, it's like in a democracy. You know, I'm not a, you know, some people might see me as a revolutionary, but I'm not there to, you know, get the guillotines out and all that. I believe in a peaceful transition in a democracy, and the way to do that is to, you know, join political parties, support political parties, you know, vote for who you think is defending liberty, and that's the way that we change things in a democracy. Now, people don't like that because it's a slow process. And you said yourself that many of these people who are all of a sudden interested in politics don't really understand how democracy works, and that's something that, you know, we have to educate people on. That you know, the choices that people make, you know, at a ballot box or whatever have consequences, and that you can't just people often say to me, "Oh, why can't we just sack Dan Andrews?" Right? Like,
because that's not how it works.
Well, it's not how it works. And do we really want to live in a society where we can just, you know, get rid of someone that was chosen like that? Do you know what I mean? It's not a good way to run a society.
There's a lot of cynicism even within, or maybe especially within libertarian and small government circles, about people who get into politics. And I've always found this a little bit mysterious, because if you're not going to work with the system as it exists, what is your pathway? What is your strategy to actually improve the world? You've either got to work with the system that exists and improve it, or you've got some strategy for magically replacing that system with a different system. Show me that roadmap. Show me that strategy, because I sincerely doubt that there is anyone that can propose a serious roadmap to replacing our system with something that would lead to a more libertarian society. I just can't see it. And therefore, the unfortunate reality, in my opinion, is we have to work with the system that we have and just try and do a better job of it. And we see this, there's a model for this with the Greens. You know, the Greens party managed to become the balance of power party in the Senate federally, and they have been for quite some time now. They're not a major party. They're never going to have the prime minister, or not, I can't say never, but they've never been close to having the prime minister be a Greens candidate. Excuse me. However, they have been the gatekeepers of policy for quite some time now. If you want to get something through Parliament, you need the Greens on board most of the time. There's obviously been exceptions, but the Greens have held a huge amount of power in the Senate federally. And if we look at that roadmap and see how successful that has been, then that's actually our roadmap to potentially turning the tables on them, actually getting a number of senators in at a federal level where the balance of power no longer sits in the hands of the Greens. It sits in the hands of principled small government, less taxes, less red tape, less green tape, more power being returned back to the average, the ordinary Australian type person. I want to get back to that before we finish tonight, but I want to make a separate comment that relates to what you said and relates to what I just said then. Power is a zero-sum game. It's one of the only zero-sum games that actually exists in the world. People think that money is a zero-sum game. Oh, he's made $1 billion, therefore that's someone else's money that he's got. That's not how it works. You know, he owns, most of that money is in shares that fluctuate in value. It's theoretical value. It's not like a Scrooge McDuck silo full of coins, right? It's not a zero-sum game at all. But power is. every time we allow the government to take a little bit more power, that has come from somewhere. There is someone that now has less power over their own lives.
It's come from the individual.
It's come from the individual. And all we're talking about is trying to reverse the trend that has been established in Australia for 60 plus years of the government is continuously taking and taking and taking. And we just want to turn that trend around and actually get to the point where the government is handing back those powers back to the ordinary Australian. Why don't you think, or why do you think we've found ourselves in this position that we're in? Why hasn't libertarianism up to this point, and I'm hoping that we're seeing a change in the zeitgeist, but time will tell. But why hasn't that been a successful philosophy up to this point in time? Is it just not appealing? Have the political parties that support these ideas just not been able to get their act together? Why have we found ourselves in the position that we're in now?
We've had this long, slow authoritarian creep for a very long time that, libertarians have noticed it and been scared of it, but I think the pandemic's brought it to the fore. But I think a lot of people were just sort of, they took everything for granted, right? Like, they were able to conduct their business and stuff. And then, small things like, new regulations and laws start to interfere with their life. And then little freedoms start disappearing. It's like the boiling frog scenario. But then the pandemic all of a sudden has just like taken away everything. And, and it's all happened all at once. And people have gone, oh, wow, like we're boiling now, and this is like serious, and we need to do something about it. Oh wow, the government's always had this power. They've just been turning it up slowly, and I think that's what it's come to. And if there is a silver lining, and if there is some sort of hope in this, and I obviously I believe that there is hope. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, right?
Sure.
The hope is that there'll be a lot of people now that value liberty more than ever because they've lost it, and that's the whole rationale for prison. We put people in prison to take away their liberty so that they value it enough. They value their liberty more than the criminal activity, right? Or whatever it is, right? So they've taken away their liberty, and the idea is that taking away their liberty makes them value it more than their crime, right? When you take away people's liberty for whatever reason, they experience trauma, as we've seen, and they experience financial pain as well. But they also they won't forget. I hope that the future, I hope, is that the children who've been affected by this will remember what happened to them. I had, it's hard for me I don't talk about personal stuff too often, but I had a terrible experience yesterday, and my wife's probably going to be upset for me sharing this, but she told me my youngest son, he's learning percentages at school in maths, and that's good. But he told her, "Mum, I've spent 12% of my life in lockdown," and this is, he and I was doing the numbers. I was like, he's not far off, and I'm like, what are we doing to these kids? I mean,
wow.
I hope the future is in these kids, who, they'll remember what happened to them, and I hope that they'll never let it happen again. I hope that they'll never let it happen again. That's my hope for the future.
I've said the same thing. My mum's parents, my grandparents on my mum's side, the effect of the Great Depression was very, very obvious on them all the way through to when they died. They weren't poor at all. They weren't rich, but they were solidly middle class, and they had a comfortable enough retirement, lived well enough for, they're both deceased now, but for the whole time that I knew them in my childhood, They were perfectly comfortable. But you know what? When a pair of bed sheets wore out, my grandmother couldn't help herself. She still cut it down the middle, flipped the two sides over, and sewed it back together again. It was what they learned to do during the Depression because they couldn't afford to buy a new set of sheets. They grew their own veggies. They had chickens. They cultivate, an enormous amount of their food actually came from their own land. Again, the effect of the Depression, she was canning, and preserving all of the time, all of this stuff. Now that was part of that generation, but it was part of that generation because of the Great Depression and what they experienced. They knew what it was like. And my hope is, again, looking for silver linings, my hope is that we're not going to see a short, sharp, reactionary backlash against what's happened, but actually there is going to be a deep, abiding, worldview, I guess, that comes out of this for people my age and younger that will then dominate politics for the next 40, 50, 60 years. I mean, I've got a 5-year-old and I've got a 1-year-old. And, my 1-year-old mercifully is just way too young to have any concept, all right, of what's going on. My 5-year-old is now old enough to understand what's going on, and trying to be a good father and raise a family in a good way with all of this going on in the background is far more challenging than it ought to be. I mean, life is already hard enough as it is without this being added on top of it. Raising kids to be well-adjusted, is already hard enough without all of this being added on top. And this is making, and I'm not trying to, have a pity party here. Imagine being a single parent under these circumstances. I mean,
yeah. And that's just why I never talk about my personal situation, because I'm in the best situation you could imagine. Like I've still got a job, right? But like, what about single parents? What about divorced couples? Trying to manage those sort of arrangements. What about people who live by themselves who aren't married? Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, the people are so lonely, and parents who've lost their businesses and stuff like this, and go through terrible anxiety. Like I've spoken to many sort of mental health professionals. They're concerned not just about the children being locked up and socially isolated. They're concerned about the children being brought up in families with parents that are so freaked out and stressed out. And, I have to constantly remind myself to try and stay as calm as I can. But, I mean, it's sometimes pretty hard, and every parent would be feeling that right now. I'm sure, like, you don't want to present a freaked out sort of persona to your own children, but and there's a really sometimes you can't you're human, like everyone's human.
And there's a really interesting psychological sort of comparison that can be made with London during the Blitz. So London itself had been relatively untouched by the Second World War, obviously very affected by it. They had rations, they had their sons were going off to war, etc. But London itself was relatively untouched. And then all of a sudden, German bombers started flying overhead and dropping bombs in huge numbers and destroying buildings and killing people. And people headed to bomb shelters. Obviously, the leadership had the foresight to have bomb shelters in place. The subway as well was all being used to try and protect people. And for about 2 weeks, people were almost living underground. And then this really funny, well, not at all funny and funny ha-ha, but a really interesting thing happened where people actually started to come back out of the shelters and just get on with life. And people started running their shops again and having farmers markets again and getting on with normal life as much as was humanly possible, even with this reality that they were being bombed every day. And sure, when the bombs were falling, they'd run back into the shelter. And then the minute there hadn't been a bomb go off for a minute or two, they got back out and they got on with the shopping and they got on with what they were doing and they started the cleanup for whatever new damage had been done. There is this enormous human resilience, this ability that we have to bounce back and to deal with just phenomenally difficult situations. But when the government keeps you in that situation for nearly 18 months and counting, and it's the government themselves who are saying, no, you're not allowed to take that risk. I mean, these people were assessing the risk. They were saying, you know what, I actually value finishing my shopping and getting home to my family enough that I'm going to walk out of this bomb shelter, even though there's a risk that there'll be another bombing raid. That was the self-assessed risk assessment that people did in reality in this awful human psychological experiment that was the Blitz. And we've been denied permission to make that choice for ourselves. And the damage of this, I think, is going to be very, very long lasting. And I hope that what it becomes is an incredible, people really place an incredibly high price tag on freedom. That's what I hope this turns into. And we see Australians become a lot more like the Eastern Europeans that I'm meeting, or the Central Americans that I'm meeting on the streets of Melbourne at these protests, where they say, hey, my dad got the family out of, the USSR, and we came here when I was a kid. And now my dad's telling me this is exactly what he saw when he was in the USSR. And they've got that heritage of valuing freedom because they were denied it. That, for me, is my biggest sort of hope.
This is, it's funny you mentioned that. Like, so many people have contacted my office and even become new party members who grew up in countries, that suffered these sort of loss of freedoms. Actually, in the last council elections, our Melbourne City Council candidate, he grew up in the USSR, and he was some of the things that he started to see happening in Victoria. It brought back memories from his childhood when he was there, and he wanted to do what he could to stop that. And I've had lots of people contact me with these sort of stories. In the Tower housing lockdown, many of those people were refugees. And to be, surrounded by police and locked in your home like that and not really know what's going on and this sort of thing, I can barely even imagine the trauma that those people must have felt to think that, they finally escaped some horrible situation in another country, and now they're somewhere, they're surrounded by these men with guns and they can't leave their home and stuff. And
it's awful. It's awful.
Yeah, I can't imagine the trauma that those people must have felt. But I mean, there's many, in the Ombudsman's report, she goes into a number of these stories, and they're absolutely heartbreaking of these people. But I've always said that, I've always thought that, the people that come to Australia, that choose to come to Australia because they see it as a free country and this sort of thing, they're some of our biggest defenders of liberty, right? Because that's what they came here for. That's why they came here. I've spoken to people who came here from China because they were persecuted for their religion. I've spoken to people that have come here from communist countries who they were persecuted because they were business people or all sorts of reasons that people came, or because they were suffering war. And these people value liberty. They value they take freedom of religion very, very seriously, as do I, right? They take freedom of movement, assembly, all these things very, very seriously. And when they see them disappearing in the country that they fled to, alarm bells ring big time. They're probably the first ones to ring the alarm bell. So
no, you're absolutely right. Now I want to come back to this question. Right now, what can we do? So I was homeschooled, as I mentioned earlier on, as we were talking, and I'm homeschooling my kid because, in my opinion, despite teachers, I don't have any issue with teachers. I think they do a wonderful job under the circumstances where they find themselves. But I think that the school system as a system is failing. And one of the areas where it's failing is in the area of civics and actually understanding how government and how elections actually function. So if you don't mind me sort of dragging you back to this topic and giving you an incredibly lead in, let's talk about the federal election, because obviously the Liberal Democrats will be running candidates for the federal election to try and shift this balance of power. The Greens have had this balance of power in the Senate most of the time for the last 20 odd years or so. I'm generalizing, and I would love nothing more than to see this moment in Australia's history become a seismic shift, where the balance of power in the Senate is suddenly being held by people that value freedom and value liberty. And I want to riff on that for a moment before I hand back to you. But But understand, individual politicians and individual senators can often do very little. This idea that, oh, but you're an elected politician, why don't you fix it? It's not how it works, right? But in order to pass a piece of legislation, it has to get put forward, and I'm talking federally here, it gets put forward in the lower house, and then it has to pass the lower house, and then it gets handed on to the Senate, and it has to pass the Senate, and then it becomes, or it gets signed by the Governor General, and it becomes law. If you hold the balance of power, let's say Liberal Nationals hold less than half, Labor Greens hold less than half, and you're the piggy in the middle, and neither of those major factions can get something through the Senate without your approval, it puts you in an immensely powerful position, not to become the prime minister or anything like that, but to influence. Because there are certain things that these two factions know that they're not going to get you to ever agree on, so they don't bother to put them forward. Or if they want to get something through, they have to do a deal with you. They have to wheel and deal. And you are in a position to be able to say, well, we want this particular thing and we want you to support this particular thing in return for us supporting that particular thing. It puts you in this powerful position if you can hold the balance of power. Now, one politician is not likely to hold the balance of power, but if you have a faction of, let's say, 4 or 5, you've got a much better probability, it's never guaranteed, but you've got a much better probability that that group of freedom-loving individuals is actually going to be able to have a meaningful impact on the legislation that gets passed. So what can we do right now? Well, there's an election coming up early next year, and that is going to be on top of us far faster than you think. Right? March seems like it's a long way away. We're stuck in lockdowns, we're dealing with COVID, we're dealing with all that stuff, but guess what? It is going to be on top of us far faster than you would think. So here's my second opportunity for a free kick for you, David. Let's talk about what can the average ordinary person do to improve the odds of a Liberal Democratic Senate candidate getting up, or if it's not a Liberal Democratic Senate candidate, some other minor party Senate candidate that is not some lefty, greeny, animal justice, whatever, but someone that is, and there's a few parties, United Australia Party, Craig Kelly is doing some fantastic work in the lower house in the federal parliament. We've got Craig Christensen, who is a Nationals Party member, but he's not running again. And so he's kind of off the chain. And I did an interview with him last week, I think was my slow chat with him. And he's doing some fantastic work. There are some other parties as well. And I'm a huge supporter of the Liberal Democrats, but I don't want to be completely one-eyed. What can the ordinary person do to improve the odds that the Liberal Democrats or a better party than what we've currently got get a Senate candidate in Victoria? What can they do?
All right, so there's a few things. Firstly, the simplest and lowest cost thing that they can do is to, share material on social media and talk to their friends about it, that sort of thing. That costs nothing, right? Second, if they've got time, they can volunteer. So we have lots of opportunities for people to volunteer. We're doing, letter drop campaigns. We're doing all sorts of volunteer activities to try and promote the party. When it gets closer to elections, there'll be, people at polling booths handing out stuff, putting up posters, this sort of thing, right? If they want to get more involved, they can become a member. They can donate money. We've been using that money effectively for ads and things like that. I've got a billboard that I haven't seen yet, apparently, of me on the PN Highway. It's got a picture of me and it says "Freedom over fear."
Nice.
We're trying to promote the idea that we should be promoting freedom over fear is what we're trying to do, and and there's other people have donated money, of course, but and the biggest thing is if someone is really committed to put their hand up and run for office, and that's not an easy thing. I've done it 3 times. Yep. Putting yourself out there in public is a scary experience. And the first 2 times I put my hand up in positions where I thought where there was literally 0 chance of me ever getting elected. But, I did it because I wanted to support the party. And, for various reasons, you need people to run in positions where you might not necessarily have a chance of actually winning.
Yep.
And then the 3rd time I actually got elected, I still thought that I had a close to zero chance, but ended up getting elected. But yeah, so look, it's one of those things. I think practically that, there's a lot of things that people can do, and we're doing it right now. Have conversations about these things. Tell people, well, actually, there's a party out there that is fighting back against this. That is, supporting smaller government. That if they get more senators elected, or if they get more upper house members elected, then there'll be more resistance to this. Now, keep in mind, in Victoria, the state of emergency extension only passed through the support of 3 crossbenchers, right? Everyone else in Parliament opposed it. Now, if only one of them had have changed their position, we wouldn't have what we've got now. We would have a different situation. Now, maybe they could have negotiated something different to what we've got now. But, ultimately, I don't know the details of what was negotiated or anything. We just said flat out from the start that we're not going to support it. So the government, I take it as a badge of pride that the government didn't bother negotiating with us. Because they knew that we weren't going to do it. But
okay, so this is worth talking about, because the psychology of politics, I think, is really important, and the layperson has no real insight at all. The politicians with the least principles get the most opportunities, because when there's a contentious vote and the government needs that extra vote, they go to the people that have no principles, or the people that they think are most easily swayed. If you are a principled politician, as David is, as his colleague Tim Quilty is, then they don't bother. You don't get a seat at the negotiation table. So you end up with this really awful choice: be unprincipled or be sidelined a lot of the time. Not every single time. Thankfully, every now and again, there's something you can do. But there's this really awful kind of almost Machiavellian type influence within politics, where the least principled people get rewarded with a seat at the table the most often. And I think we've seen that with this is my opinion, we've seen that with the state of emergency extension negotiations that have happened in the Victorian Parliament. So Victorian Authority Exposed is saying, I'm talking right now, we need something to happen. Unfortunately, that's not how real life works, right? As David was saying before, he could turn around and campaign for Freedom Day to be tomorrow. Unfortunately, there is zero chance of that getting off the ground, right? This stuff takes time. I understand people are hurting. I empathize enormously with people that are. But the reality is there is no tomorrow solution. But there might be a federal election partial solution, and then following that, a Victorian election partial solution. This is a war, not a battle. And unfortunately, to answer your question about right now, there is no right now. There is no right now solution. We could go and protest again, and I'm all for the protest. I've been very public about that. But there is no magic bullet. This is a war, and we've got to dig in and be ready for an ongoing war to happen.
We can fight back immediately in the social media world. So
sure, yes,
we've found very a lot of our support has come from social media, and that's through people sharing stuff that we do and sharing ideas. So people can do that right now. Like I said before, you can, if you see something that you like on social media that we do, you can share it right now to your friends, or you can like it and stuff like that. I'm on 3 platforms. I'm on Twitter, Insta, and Facebook, and people can do that right now. And in many ways, people find it hard to argue against pro-liberty positions in many ways, especially at the moment. Like, we've been very careful not to try and pretend that we're doctors or scientists or anything like this, right? I know that there's lots of people out there with opinions about, vaccines and all this sort of stuff, but I think as a political party, that's a silly thing for us to do. That's a decision that I've made and Tim's made. We talk about rights rights and liberties and, the morality of what the government is doing. We don't talk about the science because, we can't win that battle. We're not scientists, right? We're not going to win that battle. It's a silly battle. So I think that's a good thing to do. I think another thing is to not write people off as enemies. That might be potential friends. A lot of, like, we talk about the Greens and a lot of people say, oh, well, they're like the enemy. A lot of the new people that have come into the pro-liberty movement are ex-Greens people. Like, they thought that they were supporting a party of, principles and human rights and stuff, but really what they were supporting were hardcore authoritarians, right? That want to ban everything that they don't like. And they've realized that. They've woken up, they've said, wow. And like, people, even in the Liberal Party, like, the Liberal Party's history is founded on, the principles of liberalism and stuff. And yet a lot of people who were their supporters are saying, why aren't you guys speaking out about this? And even in the Labor Party, people who've been Labor Party supporters, they're saying, why aren't you standing up for, the kids and the workers that are losing their jobs and stuff, and these tradesmen and all these sort of people, they're wondering what's going on as well. So, I mean, it's not, you shouldn't just, like, don't tribalize is what I'd suggest.
It's a great point, and something that I have sort of touched on in previous slow chats and other content that I've put up, and it hurts me sometimes. It hurts me to do this, but we have to allow people who were wrong to change their minds, and we have to welcome them with open arms. And sometimes that hurts, when you're dealing with a friend who's been wrong about so many things and has been opposing you, or you're dealing with a politician, or you're dealing with some high-profile celebrity who's been wrong and has been a problem and has been part of the problem. When they finally begin to come around, it's like, if we sit here and go, yeah, but you're that guy, and create a hostile environment, then we lose them. And creating an environment where we can, because I was wrong. I was a conservative for the first 25 odd years of my life. I was a conservative. I was wrong about so many things. This is a moment in history where a lot of people are changing. They're changing their minds. And we have to allow people who were wrong the grace and the space to join our ranks, and to not be holding them.
I'm one of them.
Yeah, well, we both are. We both are.
I'm one of them. I'm one of them. So people are often surprised when I tell them that, I used to be one of these people that, supported the Greens and stuff. Like,
hang on. Sorry, what? You supported the Greens? Oh, sorry, we've lost the connection to David Limbrick. I don't know what happened.
Once upon a time. But it was a very long time ago. But, the idea of tolerance as well is really important, right? So I think some of the protesters, I think their messaging has been very bad, and I know that you've been talking about this. Like, they were some people were criticizing me because I was wearing a mask at the protests, and they were saying, "Oh, take your mask off." Why are you doing that? And I'm like, well, you're not respecting my choice now. So
that's right.
You're in this situation, you're the authoritarian not respecting someone's choices. With vaccines and stuff as well. Like, I intentionally haven't revealed my vaccine status because I don't like the idea of setting the precedent of, judging people based on their medical status. But there's people that have been criticizing people who've chosen to have a vaccine, or and if you're doing that, then you're just as bad as the people who criticize people for not having a vaccine, right? You're just as bad as them. So you got to respect people's choices. And if someone chooses to have a vaccine or whatever, or they choose to wear a mask or whatever, I mean, like, in my situation, I don't want to, like with the masks and stuff, for instance. When I sat out on the front of Parliament, even the picture has me and Tim wearing masks. We wanted to follow the rules because we didn't want to be, criticised for that, right?
Yeah.
There's there's no benefit to opening up new ways to criticize it, right?
Yeah. Sorry, James's comment here is brilliant. I was a socialist, then a libertarian, now a classical liberal, but I've always been right.
Okay.
That's a great comment. Thank you, James. But this is, I mean, we are in an ideological kind of battle, so to speak. But when you use this kind of battle terminology, which I do, so I'm guilty, there is a natural tendency for people to want to draw lines and create enemies. And actually, what we need to be doing is creating understanding. And that sounds all very hippie-ish and hearts and minds campaign kind of thing. But we are in a society together, whether we like it or not. The system that we have is a democratic system where the majority actually tends to get what they want. And so it's on us. If we want to change things, we actually need to change what the majority of people want. And that means, we've got to get involved. And we've got to
just sit back. And because here's the thing, right? If you just leave everything to these other people and you don't get involved in politics and in the world, then you're leaving it to everyone else to do it for you. And in a lot of these situations, the people that get involved are not doing it for good reasons. They're doing it for all sorts of bad reasons. One of the most amazing things is if you watch Parliament a lot of the time, this confused me as well. I often wonder, who are these people actually talking to when they do these speeches sometimes? And
there's no one in the room.
Well, they're talking to their own people. Right? They're not actually. So like minor parties are quite different. So we're not trying to necessarily talk to our own people. We're trying to reach a wider audience. But a lot of in the major parties, they're trying to talk to their own people and say, look, I'm one of you. I'm one of us. And
sort of virtue signaling within that crowd.
Well, so that they get their pre-selection and stuff like that. That's what it's all about, right? But with us, pre-selection doesn't guarantee anything really. But in a major party, pre-selection mean, especially in the Senate or upper house, it means you're done. You're in. You're in. So okay. I mean,
Can I talk about the Senate for a moment? And I want to go back to kind of the civics and just talking a little bit about how this works, because I think this is so important for more people to understand. And because once you understand how the Senate works, you will understand what you can do as an individual that might actually shift the needle a little bit. So at a federal level, the Senate works. There are 6 Senate seats per state, and I think 2 per territory, but I'm not going to talk about territories. I believe there's 6 per state. And effectively, the maths works out like this. If you can get 14% of the vote, you get a Senate seat. So the first 5 Senate seats basically get won by Labor and Liberal and maybe Nationals and so forth, because they have enough primary vote to get them a seat in their own right. But there's always that one last little seat where most of the time no one has 14%. It's going to be won on a lower percentage than that. And these are the seats that the Greens pick up. The Greens typically do not get enough of a vote to earn a seat on primary votes alone. And they can't get one of the other seats. They are picking up that last seat. Now, one of the things that's been really striking for me, I've said this before. It's not news to those who follow me closely. I've been contemplating for the first time after 12 years of being asked by political party after political party to throw my hat in the ring and actually run. And I've said no every other time for the last 12 years because I think I can be more effective as a commentator. I think I can be more effective doing what I'm doing. However, I've actually been contemplating it seriously for the first time really ever. And so I've been looking at a lot of the numbers and how does this work and what does this look like? And I want to convey one of the single most important lessons that I've come to learn out of the numbers that I've seen looking at Senate elections over the last 30 odd years. Preferences are where the minor party, that last Senate seat for each state, is decided. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about how it works, especially now because the rules have just changed around how preferences are done. Previously, preferences were done by the party. That's no longer the case. You, as the voter, will decide your own preferences. And when you vote for the Senate, if you vote above the line, you must number 5 parties. at least. All right. So I was on the AEC.
It's 6, isn't it? Anyway, but whatever.
I was on the AEC website yesterday. I'm fairly sure it was 5, but yes, there is a specified number that you must vote for. You are setting your own preferences, and here's how to think about it. The moment you put one of the major parties in, if you vote one of the major parties as number 1, then your vote is going to stick on that major party, right? And it's not going to end up flowing to anybody else. And here's why. Here's how preferences get calculated. So you number 1 to 6 or 1 to 5, whatever it is, all right? You said, number 1 for David Limbrick, Liberal Democrats in the Victorian election, or for Liberal Democrats in the Senate for the federal election coming up. You said number 2, somebody else, number 3, number 4, number 5, right? What happens is they get all the primary votes and they look at whichever party got the least and they distribute the preferences. So, 100 people voted number 1 for some random dude who decided to run in the Senate. Okay. Those 100 votes now, they lose their number 1 vote because he was the lowest candidate. And they look at what was the number 2 vote and they distribute it across to whoever got the number 2 votes, right? And their totals go up a little teeny tiny bit. And then they say, right, who's lowest now? And there's 500 votes there and they distribute those to the number 2. And for some people, it'll be for the number 3 because they voted number 1 for the person who lost and number 2 for the person who was second last. So now they're onto their 3rd vote. And so they keep on cascading down the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as they eliminate the lowest person over and over again. There's this process. And the votes keep distributing based on the preferences that the voter has specified on the Senate ticket. What happens when you reach a major party is they're not anywhere near the bottom. So they're not about to get eliminated, which means once you vote for them, let's say it's the Liberal Party, right? Once you put the Liberal Party in at number 3, your first vote was for that dude, your second vote was for that woman, your third vote was for the Liberal Party. Chances are that's where it sticks and that's where it stays, right?
Yes.
The number 1 thing that in my personal view needs to be done by voters in Victoria is we need to vote for at least 4 or 5 liberty-friendly, and none of them are perfect, but liberty-friendly minor parties before we give our vote to any of the major parties. Now, I get it, all right? You're looking at, let's say last election, you were looking at Bill Shorten versus ScoMo, okay? And you might be sitting there, as I was, looking at it going, ScoMo's terrible, but Bill Shorten's going to be a disaster, okay? So the devil that I would vote for under this circumstance is going to be ScoMo. But don't vote 1 for ScoMo and then put in the minor parties. That's just a vote for ScoMo, right? You vote for all the minor parties, and then at the very end, you pick the lesser of 2 evils if that's something that you want to do, right at the very end. And at that point, your vote is going to do the most possible work for these minor parties. Is that a fair summation of how the Senate kind of works?
Yes, yeah. Like if you're basically your preferences sort of stop at the point where you nominate a major party, really.
Yeah.
Is basically what you're saying, and therefore, if you want to maximize the influence of your vote, then putting a lot of minor parties first, and then the major party of your choice, if you want to vote for a major party. Maximizes the influence and maximizes the way that it can get distributed, because if you put your preference as number 1 Liberal Party and you say, oh well, I like David Limbrick, so I'll put him number 2, that actually does nothing for us.
Pointless.
It stops at number 1.
Pointless.
It does. So that doesn't help us at all. So if you wanted to support the Liberal Democrats as through say, oh well, we'll put you as a number 2 option to the Liberal Party, actually that doesn't help at all. So Mike
is asking, how do we vote when no preference goes to the 2 major parties? Well, that's simple. You have to vote a certain number of times, 5 or 6, and you just make sure that you vote for 5 or 6 minor parties. And at that point, you are entitled to stop. You don't have to keep going at that point. So your vote never ends up.
I would say though that will end up with your vote exhausting. So in that situation, if none of those minor parties got elected that you voted for, then ultimately, because of the deal that the Greens and the coalition did, believe it or not, to change the voting system, your vote will actually exhaust and will go nowhere. Under the old system, the group voting ticket system, your vote would always end up going somewhere. And you can still do that by numbering everything.
Number if you want that to happen. I actually like the reform. I get why some minor parties wouldn't love it, but I think from the point of view of me controlling exactly what happens to my vote and having that complete control, I actually like it as a reform. But
you always had that option though.
Yes, yeah, correct. And I always used to use that option. There was a time though where you had to number every single party, I think it was, if you wanted to do it that way. And so you'd sit there with the Senate ticket, which is a mile long, and have to number absolutely every single one. Whereas I'm quite happy to have a situation where I number all the people that I'm willing for my vote to go to, and then after that, let it exhaust. Because I don't want my vote to end up. I had this situation years ago with the Darebin council election when I was living in the northern suburbs, where I elected not to vote at all because I looked at all of the local council candidates and I had the choice between the socialist or the Marxist. And there were about 5 different socialists and 6 different Marxists, but they were my choices. And so I never showed up, and they sent me a fine, and I sent them a letter back quoting the Constitution. I covered it in a previous slow chat, and they never got in touch with me again. They never chased me for my $55 fine. But this, I think, is the message that we've got to get out to everybody, and this is where the conversations come in. David's been talking about the thing you can do now is social media. And also you can be talking to people. And when we're talking to people, we need to be helping them understand. If you're looking at the major parties and going, this major party is less bad than that major party, that's fine. Give them your last Senate vote, not your first one. Give them the last Senate vote. Give, in my view, the first Senate vote to the Liberal Democrats. And then you might turn around and go, okay, you know what? They're not as good, but I'm going to vote for One Nation. I'm going to vote for United Australia Party. I'm going to vote for the Informed Medical Opinions Party. I'm going to vote for these other people, right, who are running Senate candidates. And then finally, at the very end, the last number that I write is for the major party that I would prefer over the other one. And if we can get that message out so that all of these minor parties, somewhat liberty-inclined minor party voters, are actually using their preferences properly, then I think we've got actually a genuine chance at, instead of the Greens getting that last Senate spot, we might be able to give it to someone who's actually going to be pro-freedom, at least in some degree. It might not be perfect. It might not be the Liberal Democrats candidate as much as I would love it to be, but we can give it to someone who's going to be less bad than what we have at the moment. Because in Victoria, that last seat goes to the Greens. And that's been the case for many elections. It's their seat. They basically own it now. And if we're going to change that, it's going to happen in what we do with the preferences and how we handle our voting for the minor parties before we get to the major party. So I realize I've monopolized the conversation for a couple of minutes there, but I just think this is so crucial if we're going to actually change anything.
Yeah, and look, yes, you're exactly right that the critical takeaway is that your vote effectively stops at the point where you nominate a major party. That's the critical point. So if you put a major party number 1, Liberal Democrats number 2, that's it.
There's no point. No point.
Yeah, there's no point. It sort of stops at that point. And that's why, when the minor parties, try and organize preferences and stuff, they always try and preference each other first before the major parties because of that. That's why it happens. So
yeah. And look, this is something I'm going to be banging on about between now and the election and the federal election, because we've just got to get this out. Civics classes are failing in this country. I saw a question earlier. Someone said, "Oh, do people really not know about this?" People really don't know about this. This is. It's horrifying to think that people go through 12 years of government education, but I can't help but feel like there's a perverse incentive for the government to not really want people to actually understand how this works. Because if people really understood how it worked, they might actually use their vote more effectively for one of the minor parties, and the government doesn't want that. So I'm mindful that we're now heading towards the 3-hour mark. So I'm
which I never thought that I'd have the stamina to do, but after committee hearings. But there you go. It's been so fun chatting with you. That I'm still fine. So
David, you've been amazing, and I've so enjoyed what you've had to say and the input that you've had, and I'm so appreciating what you're doing. It is a very tricky thing for an elected member of parliament to speak out. It's very easy for me as a political commentator / activist. I can say whatever I want. I might get arrested for it in Daniel Andrews' Victoria. But really, it's very easy for me to say whatever I like. And I respect the fact that for an elected member, things are a little bit trickier. You do have to be a little bit more careful in a lot of ways. And I really appreciate what you have come out and said publicly. And as time has gone on, you've escalated and you've become stronger and firmer and clearer and started to take more and more of a stance. And I think the way that you've played this has been really, really excellent. What would you say now to constituents of yours and to other Victorians, maybe outside of your constituency, there's a lot of people struggling right now? And I kind of want to give you the last word and sign off on whatever it is that you've got to say for us now. But what can you say that might give people a sense of hope, a sense of purpose, maybe something that they can do, something practical, because people often feel better when they feel like they're actually involved. Do you have any sort of last thoughts?
Look, we've spoken about, practical actions, but I think, look after yourself and look after your family and maintain hope. That's the most important thing at the moment. We will get through this, but the thing that I want people to really focus on is remembering what's happening now, and not forgetting what's happening now, because people forget, and we need to remember this. So remember the feelings that we're having now of these bad things that are happening to all of us. Remember it, and don't let them erase history. And the politicians always try and trick people and blame other people and all this, but we know what's happened to us, and I think maintain hope. We are going to get through this situation. I think we there was a big shift yesterday when what I've called the cult of COVID zero was dead. It was slain dead. The Premier came out, and then the Age newspaper, to my shock and to your shock, said, we're sort of reaching our limit. They still had a crack at us crazy libertarians. Of course, they couldn't help themselves, but it was quite a shift, and I think even the sort of Labor activist types on social media were sort of a bit shocked and not quite sure how to deal with it. I think the government's probably a bit worried about it. They're not worried about us, but they're worried about the mood of the people. And I think the parks issue, I think they trod on a landmine with that.
Correct.
I think they totally underestimated how close to the edge so many families were, and that was the tipping point. When they closed the parks, they trod on that landmine, and the mums and dads of Victoria said, "You guys are crazy. Like, this is all I've got. This is all I've got, and you're taking it away from me." So don't forget what they did.
Yeah, good. Thank you so much. I said I was going to give you the last word, but I can't help myself. I want to add, there's been a couple of things in the last week that have happened that I think are fantastic. You're absolutely right. COVID zero is dead. That happened literally today and yesterday. We saw a softening of his language, and then now a complete rejection of COVID zero. The other thing that's happened is an opinion poll now showing that support for the lockdowns is below 50% for the first time. And because Daniel Andrews is all about the opinion polls, that's going to rock his world and rock his support base within his own party and within the bureaucrats that are propping him up. And the other thing that's happened is New South Wales coming out in the last week or so and acknowledging that a death with COVID is not the same as a death from COVID, and acknowledging that the numbers aren't necessarily actually accurate in terms of the lethality of COVID-19. You put all of this together. I mean, these are all things that I've been saying since March 2020, and David, you've been saying for a very long time as well. Excuse me. And finally, it's actually breaking through, and it's hitting the mainstream media. My sense is that the pendulum has reached its peak. It's reached its zenith. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to suddenly, we're going to get a sudden breakthrough, but it's going to get right up to that very peak and then slowly start to swing the other way and then gather momentum in the other direction. And I feel like we are right at that point. And I think that the last week and what you were talking about with COVID zero being killed off by Daniel Andrews and the other things that we've seen, the popularity, the opinion polls, and then the New South Wales government shift on the definition of a COVID death. These are small, but I think they're significant. So I believe that we may well actually be right now at the worst of it. And
I'm loath to make predictions like that because I've made a couple of them before and I've been totally wrong. But sure. I really do feel like something shifted this week. I
agree.
The COVID zero cult, the donut days people, like their history, they're in the dustbin of history now. They're gone, and they were wrong. So the pendulum is shifting the other way. Let's accelerate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, David, thank you so much for being on the right side of history. Thank you so much to you and to Tim. If it weren't for you guys, this last year and a half would have felt incredibly lonely for me. I mean, it was lonely already because there's not a lot of us, but it would have been so much worse without you guys being where you are and saying what you've said and bringing that little ray of hope and that little bit of sanity into these conversations. I from the bottom of my heart, I'm a huge fan, and I'm deeply grateful to you and to Tim for all the work that you've done, and especially yourself. I mean, you're in Metro Melbourne, so you're around a little bit more. Tim has the disadvantage of being up on the river, obviously representing his constituents, but it means that he's not able to get in quite as much. So huge respect to you. The fact that you were at the protest where we all got, or not we, I actually was outside the kettle, but so many people got kettled. And you didn't pull the politician card. You didn't pull the rank card. You sat there and you said, you know what? I'm going to allow myself to be treated like everybody else. And I have so much respect for you personally. And I have so much hope for the Liberal Democrats. I think that this is a moment where so many Victorians and so many Australians are coming to their senses and for the first time realizing that just because you ignore politics doesn't mean that politicians are going to ignore you. And the time has come to get involved. So, guys, I cannot recommend the Liberal Democrats highly enough. Please, if you're not a member of any other political party, even if you've never been a member of a political party, you don't think of yourself as being political, please get on their website, Liberal Democrats, look them up, join, become a member, but especially become a volunteer. Go out onto a voting booth for them, hand out how to vote cards, do all that basic stuff that might seem like it doesn't change things, but for a minor party, all of that stuff does move the needle. Every extra person they have standing on a voting booth moves the needle. So that's where I think we should probably finish tonight, David. But I'm so grateful for your time. You've given us 3 hours of your time, and I know that you're a busy man and you've got a family and everything else. So I'm so grateful. And on that, I think we should probably call it a night.
Look, I'd just like to say as well, thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate the work that you've been doing, and I know the severe risks that you've been taking, and that many people have been taking, and I acknowledge those risks, and it's not just you as well. Like many,
there's many
now, have been taking risks. I urge people though to be careful to be peaceful in whatever they do. And I'm a peaceful person. I think of myself as someone that promotes peace, and I don't want to see people get hurt and arrested and all this sort of stuff. So do what you can, but remain peaceful.
I 100% on the peacefulness issue. On the arrested issue, well, that's not up to me, and it's not up to how peaceful I am. That's actually up to how violent and how aggressive Daniel Andrews and his Stasi want to be. I've put myself out there. I have literally said on my Facebook page, I am inciting people to go and protest. I stand by that comment. I know I've made it multiple times, and I'll potentially make it again in future. Who knows? I know the police do watch what I do. I'm very grateful for the extra views, guys, but I would love it if you could like and maybe make a comment every once in a while. That'd be appreciated. But I know that there's the police watch everything I do. They're probably making a very long list of all the things they want to charge me with. I don't know. But you know what? We have what we have in terms of the freedoms that we have, the governmental system that we have, the human rights that we have. We have what we have because other people in history risked everything. Everything. And if I'm not willing to risk being arrested and spending some time in prison, then I am not worthy of what I was given. That's how I see it. That's my personal, and that's not everyone's choice. I'm not telling you what you need to do or anyone else what they need to do, but that's the position that I have come to. And when I look back on my life, I want to know that I earned and was worthy of what I inherited when I was lucky enough to be born into this country. And if that means I have to take a stand and take a risk, then that's what I will do. I will never be violent. I will never initiate any violence against another human being that is antithetical to everything that I stand for. But if standing my ground means that someone else is going to bring violence against me, then so be it. I won't retaliate. I'm not going to fight back. But I will suffer whatever I have to suffer in order to earn and be worthy of what I was given by my ancestors and the people that made this amazing country what it is. So on that note, David, thank you so much. We're going to call it a night. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I'll be back next week for another slow chat with another guest who I promise is going to be just as fascinating. Thank you so much for sticking with it for 3 hours. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I know. It blows my mind. Every single week it blows my mind. And yet here we are. Thank you so much. I'll see you again next week. Thank you, David.